welcome everybody to the May meeting of the Nevada County Camera Club. So we've got a jam-packed schedule this evening. And I want to start with just a couple announcements. The first one is, yes, we're being recorded. Normally I have to say that. Now Zoom is saying it for me. And everyone is basically unmuted, but if there is background noise that gets to be an issue, Kathy and I are watching the chat and may mute you if there's something going on in your world. So, and then after the meeting, I will upload this video, a video of the meeting up to the club's website. It takes 2 or 3 days for the video to render and for me to get it uploaded, but I will get it up there. So general announcements from me are, please know, I know everybody's wondering, when are we going to be able to meet in person again? And I'm sure, just like me, I'm really looking forward to being able to do that. And so, but right now, Nevada County is still in the red tier. So we're not supposed to be meeting in large groups, but know that the board is watching the Nevada County guidelines and the state guidelines. And as soon as large gatherings are allowed for Nevada County, we will be returning to in-person meetings. But just for future reference, I mean, Kathy and I have talked, these Zoom meetings have really allowed us to have some really fantastic speakers who are not local. So I could see in the future if we could have Zoom meetings where we're bringing in some of these fantastic speakers if they're only available in a remote modality. So we'll see. But we'll let you know as soon as we're able to meet in person, and hopefully soon, but we can't say just yet. What else? A couple of minor updates on mine is from the board is the board did a review of the club's bylaws, and those are posted on the club's website. Very minor review and just a couple of minor changes. We took out the word traditional digital and film photography, took out the word traditional, because we believe we are supporting all digital and film photography. So we took out the one word traditional. And then we also changed the pronouns. It said he for the president or vice president or members of the club. We changed it to he, she, or they to be politically correct and represent and be inclusive of all of our members. So there's a couple of small changes. Dave Arstein will be posting the modified bylaws up on the club's website later today. So if you'd like to look those up, please do so. And then for me, that's all the announcements I have, and there's a lot other things going on. So I'm going to pass it to the treasurer, Mike Shea. Mike, I did not see him, but I hope he
is there.
I'm here.
You're here. Yay. Okay.
So, I mean, the only thing I really have to report is that the laptop that we have been using for in-person meetings, the monitor on it is no longer working. It would cost like $300 to fix it, and for another like $150 we can buy a brand new laptop. So when the next time the board meets, we're going to put this on the agenda, talk about it, but probably we're going to be spending about $450 on a new laptop, and that's really it. Other than that, we're doing good.
Okay. All right, thank you, Mike. All right, how about membership? Mark Triolo.
Hi, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well tonight. Good evening, everybody. We have a couple new members I wanted to recognize. Let me grab my list. I think one of them is online with us. Lucy Tetro, am I pronouncing that correctly, Lucy? You can unmute yourself.
Or press the space bar.
Yeah. I saw you there.
I saw her.
She was there.
Did she disappear?
Yeah, she's here, but
maybe she stepped away for a moment.
Yeah.
See her right at this moment. Okay, I'll come back to her. I don't think the other ones are online, but let me ask. John Fox, are you with us tonight? If so, can you unmute and say hello?
No.
How about Steve Carlton?
Don't see Steve.
Stefan Black?
No.
Sally Waters? Okay, I'll have to catch up with them next time around. So let's see, Lucy is not here, is that right?
But she's
Yeah.
here.
Okay, got her, yeah. She's muted. And
Yes, I've just got to figure out. I wanted to put it on the big screen up here.
Okay, so I'll recognize Lucy maybe later in the meeting when she comes back with us. There she is. Hi, Lucy. Can you unmute?
Tell her how
Press your space bar.
All right.
and hold it
I
down.
have to get my dinner. Sorry.
That's okay.
Just wanted to welcome you to the organization and just have you say a couple seconds about what type of photography you do so we can get to know you a little bit.
Yes. I am somebody who studied film way back 40 some years ago and have had a career as a psychotherapist mostly. And really just during COVID, I realized that going out with a camera was a whole lot of fun. And it's one of the few things I could do. So I bought a Panasonic Lumix that has a 60 times lens. So I could just start with a really accessible automatic camera. This is after having used my iPhone for some years, but it's definitely just in the last year and a half that I've been taking, you know, hundreds of pictures at a time and really doing a lot of post production editing and playing with my pictures and posting them mostly on Instagram because it's so easy and accessible. And so that's what I've been doing and just really enjoying the opportunity to learn more and have more conversations with other people who are also excited about photography of all kinds. For me, it's mostly, I step out on my front porch. So there's deer, there's horses, there's wild animals, there's flowers, there's plants. So I'm mostly in nature. But this last weekend, because of the creative portrait project, I decided to go into town to the farmer's market in Nevada City. And I took 100 and something pictures of dogs, kids, and people. So I'm expanding already.
Great. Well, I think you're absolutely in the right place.
Good.
You'll enjoy that camera and you'll now have lots of people to talk with and exchange, as well as lots of learning opportunities with field trips and workshops and all those kinds of things. So be sure to stop in for one of the new member orientation meetings that I hold and you will get an email on that well in advance.
Super.
So welcome, Lucy, and hope you enjoy the organization. It's great to have you. So with that, Rachel, I will turn it back over to you. No, wait, let me ask. Do we have any guests this evening? Any guests, if you could unmute and raise your hand. Any guests? We didn't see anyone. Doesn't look like it. Okay. Okay, Rachel, I will turn it back over to you. Thanks.
Okay. All right. And so I realize I didn't introduce myself for the newer folks. I'm Rachel Rosenthal. I serve as president for this year. And the people you're hearing from are some of the board members of the club. So next up is Bill Wages as our field trip coordinator. I think Bill is up with David Wong, correct?
Yes, he is.
Correct.
Is there anybody else who wants to speak to the field trips? And I can give a brief. No? Okay. All right. So just stay tuned in your email. I'll just say there were a couple of emails that went out recently. One on behalf of David Wong, who's working with Bill to take a trip up to see the Mustangs in Nevada. Was that June 3rd? Does that sound right? It's kind of it's not a club field trip. David just wanted to make it available to everybody. It's kind of on a first come, first serve. So if you have interest in that, contact David Wong directly on that one. And George, do you want to share field trips potential in the future? Are you ready to do that or not tonight?
I wanted Bill to announce it, but we can talk about it. So for the October field trip, instead of going to the Eastern Sierra only, I have a plan to go to Death Valley. So to spend a total of 3 or 4 nights, depending.
Oh, we lost your sound if you can hear me.
Okay, yes, I can hear
There
you.
you are. There you are. Okay.
There will be 2 nights. There will be 2 nights in Death Valley, 1 night in Lone Pine, near the Alabama Hills. And for those who want to stay a little bit longer, there will be 1 night in Kentucky.
Okay.
So there's many locations in the Death Valley to address. I think we should have something interesting.
Okay.
No big adventurous hike.
Okay.
Everything.
All right.
Hey, Rachel,
Yes.
I'd like to say a few words about the Wild Mustang trip.
Oh,
'cause
that's
I just
true. You went as well.
Yeah,
Sure.
I went as well, and actually I went back this weekend. And so just let me just say a few things. One is if you're going to be driving there, the roads are, you get out on in the BLM land, it's really rough out there. So make sure your tires are in good condition. Make sure your spare tire is in good condition just in case, because it's slow going and
Okay.
going over a lot of rocks, and it's a rough ride. Plus, nothing's going to guarantee that you're going to see the horses. So I went Saturday evening, didn't see any, went again Sunday morning, and I was able to see some, but it required a little bit of walking too. So you might have to get out of the vehicle and walk. So just basically, it's a cool experience, but there's no guarantees.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mike. And so, George, anything else you'd like to add?
Yes, no adventurous hike.
No adventurous hike. Okay.
Everything will be within 200 yards maximum, 300 maybe from the car.
Okay.
So easy
All right.
walking locations.
Okay.
So Rachel, if I could jump in for a second, I think I heard that George's connection sounded better earlier today, or
It's
would it
not
make-
terrific right now. Right.
but maybe the other tech people can comment. Would it make sense for George to sign off, turn off his internet, reconnect it, drop a new connection, then sign back into our meeting? You think we'd get better audio that way?
I couldn't tell you. Some of our IT folks think that's a good idea. So, George, we're having a really hard time. It's cutting out, at least to me.
Let me try to leave the meeting and reconnect.
Okay. All right.
Another thing you could do, George, is to stop your photo.
Oh, that would require less bandwidth on his part, but he'll
Then
need it for
when
the
he's-
presentation. He's presenting tonight. It's unfortunately.
Yeah, when he shares screen, we don't gain anything there.
There is another option.
What?
There are phone numbers on the invite list. You can actually call in with a cell phone and do audio over the phone instead of through Zoom.
Okay. Thank you. He's got to do video tonight, though. That's the problem.
Well, I am back. Is it better?
It seems to be a little
better
better.
so far. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Let's hope that holds. Fingers crossed.
It does
Okay.
sound better, George, when you're speaking loudly, if possible.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so George, the trip he's referring to is not on the club's website yet, but it will be posted soon, and there'll be an email that goes out to announce when it's ready for signups.
It will be in early October, starting on the 3rd or 4th.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
All right, thank you. All right, next on my list is the gallery shows. I know Ellen's out of town tonight, but Dave McLellan, did you want to share about the current exhibit?
Oh, sure. We put the show up a couple of weeks ago at Nevada City Picture Framing. Thank you to everyone who participated. And Ellen just sent out a new call for entries for the next show, which will go up in mid-July and be there through September this time. And that one is going to be about creative portraiture. It can be pictures of people you know, people you don't know. It can be creative selfies as well. So there's really no limitations. It's pictures of people. So we're hoping that if you haven't shown before, definitely think about participating. There's very little pressure involved in this situation. And it's a great little venue to share your work with. So check your emails for Ellen's call for art, and please submit to her and I, and we'll be in touch if you do and let you know what to do next. Thanks.
Okay. All right, thanks, Dave. And on that same note about exhibitions, I did want to give kudos. We have several club members who are in a couple of the larger shows in the Sacramento area, starting with the Viewpoint Photographic Arts Center down in Sacramento. If you're a member of Viewpoint, you got to compete in a juried show to have your images at the Crocker Art Museum. And that exhibition is currently up and running through August 1st. So if you're down that way, stop at the Crocker and see some of our members' work. So I want to say kudos to the folks who have pieces in that show. Chris Schiller, who's one of our judges tonight, David Wong, Ellen Davis, Kathy Triolo, Mike Shea, and myself all have images down in that show. And then also there are several people who entered the KVIE art auction, which raises money for the local PBS station down in Sacramento. That is also another juried show, which will be on TV in October, and the artwork is auctioned off to benefit KVIE. And so we have 4 members who are in the KVIE show this year. These are in no particular order: Janice Rosner, Ingrid Lockhart, Kathy Triolo, and myself. So congratulations to everybody for getting your work out into the Sacramento area. Nevada County Camera Club is very well represented. So congratulations to everybody. And one last comment.
Congratulations, Rachel, to you for being a bell ringer last year.
Yeah, well, on the KVIE, they put it up and they auction it off, and you sit there biting your nails to see if anybody's even going to bid on your piece. And if they do bid, and if they meet the price that you put on the show, they ring a bell and you get to be a bell ringer. So that's a cool thing if you get to be a bell ringer. So it's like, whew, somebody actually likes my work. So it puts a little excitement in it. So also one last comment before I turn it over to Kathy for the program is we had the survey, which we shared the results last month. And one item was the Google email group, which is an email group you can send out emails to all the members of the club. And about 40% of the people, of the club members, didn't know about the Google group, nor were they a participant in it. So just giving you a heads up, I'm encouraging everybody to join the Google group. And the administrator is Kathy Triolo. You can send her an email and she can get you signed up. And then I will be following up with an email this week with some directions and some really reasons why we'd encourage you to join the Google group. It's a great way to communicate with your fellow club members. You're going to go shoot somewhere, you can post a meetup. I'm going up north to shoot North Table Mountain. Somebody want to go with me, assuming everybody's vaccinated and all that. Or if you have a question for the club members, the depth of knowledge in this club is extraordinary. So it's a great resource for you as a club member. So I encourage you to become a member if you are not. And so with that, that's all my announcements. I will turn it over to Kathy, who's our VP, for our presentation.
All right, thank you, Rachel.
All right.
Appreciate that. So I want to share about the thought for this particular panel and the fact that it started when I was talking with another club member about some submitted photos, and we had seen them, and they asked, how did they get that look? And it's just, since then, it comes up a lot. I've heard the same question from other members. And so I thought it would be great to invite some members who can make an image into a certain look to show their work and explain their artistic approach to us. But before we start, I want you to know that I was asked why there are no women on the panel. So I want you to know that Ellen Davis and Janice Rosner were at the top of my list and were asked, but both are traveling and not able to attend tonight's meeting. So we are an equal opportunity club, and please reach out. Let me know if you have something you'd like to present. You could be a he, her, them, they. I'm perfectly fine. So enough said about that. If you like this subject tonight, if you found it useful to get to know other members' work and how they do it, let me know. And then I hope Douglas will plan another panel at the November workshop with other members of this club. So I'm Personally, I'm interested in members who could take a photo from pre-visualization in raw capture to their artistic vision and to understand what their process is. So it isn't just about the technical skill in a software program, but it's really about understanding their artistic vision in creating the image. So this is the closest we can get to getting into their minds, right? Tonight, we have 5 members who all have very different artistic approaches to making a photo. And we're going to alphabetically start with Rick Aeschliman, then Frank Bloksberg, David McLellan, George Pelpel, and finishing the panel will be Mike Shea. I want to thank all of you very much for taking the time to prepare this presentation for our club members. Each one of them has 15 minutes, and that will include questions. So because I'm going to moderate, if you do have a question, put it in the chat box. I will read it, and then at an appropriate time, I will share with the presenter so that we're not interrupting them. So with that, I'd like to welcome our first presenter, Rick Aeschliman. And he's going to share his screen. If he's, yes, good.
You got it?
Yeah.
Okay. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes. Okay, good. As many of you know, I'm a big advocate of planning shots. And this is absolutely an unplanned shot. So that's why I decided to include it. This is at Hungry Packer Lake, 7 miles out of Sabrina Basin on a backpacking trip last summer in July. And I had finished my morning shoot. I was shooting a waterfall called Moonlight Falls. And with the, I think that picture peak, which is that big peak you see is probably close to 13,000 feet because we're at our baseline right there is 11,000. And I'd finished my shoot for the morning. The peak was starting to really blow out the highlights, and I was done. I was walking back to my camp. And one of the things, I was crossing this little creek and I looked up and I saw the 3 elements that I always look for in my photographs, which is a really solid foreground, which you see here, a midground, kind of a middle, and then a background. And the reason I do that or look for that kind of a composition is it gives you good separation between elements. And when you can get good separation between elements, you can get a photograph that I'm not going to say it's 3D, but it gives it some really incredible depth. So what I did here was I knew that I only had a few minutes before that sun was going to be hitting this. And it did. 2 minutes later, this shot was pretty much useless. It was totally blown out. So I took, I got down low, fairly low, but I had to work fast. And I knew that I couldn't, that the highlights in that peak was going to be my biggest nemesis. So I deliberately underexposed it 3 stops, figuring it, and had my ISO fairly low at 100 so that I could pull the details out of the shadows, you know, when I got back to my office. So, and another thing that really caught my eye on this particular photograph was a leading line. You can see the leading line in this creek going up to the payoff, which is the sky and the mountains up here. So when, you know, the critiques often will talk about a leading line. And sometimes I question why that was important because it never really went to a payoff. So when you're doing a leading line, make sure it leads to something that is interesting to look at. In this case, it's the peaks in the sky. As I mentioned before, the time was really important, so I deliberately undershot it. I didn't even have time to set up my bracketing. I just had to shoot it real quick and get a good solid footing in my tripod so I would have, it wouldn't blurred. In this particular case, I used a pretty high f-stop because I wanted everything in focus. I think it was f11 or 13. Another thing with this photograph that caught my eye when I saw it was the opposite values of the colors. Whenever you have, for instance, blue to yellow or orange, which are opposites or relative opposites, the visual impact is going to be much greater because of the increased contrast and separation between the elements. So again, I try to get separation between elements in my landscapes so they're a little more compelling and interesting. It's also true of luminosity values, that is the light and shadow values, whereas you have bright, dark, bright, dark. And that works really well also in my astrophotography photographs. So anyway, that was the thought process in this. I thought about bringing in one of my fully prepared and planned photos or images, but we don't have enough time for that. That would be a program all by itself. So with that said, I'll show you how I process this.
So Rick, I have a question for you.
Yes.
You titled this creating depth and drama. Is that really what you're going for at the very, is that what you start with the idea and that you end up with?
Well, the final image that you saw there was what I actually saw and witnessed. And to me, there was a lot of drama in that with the color and luminosity contrast that I was seeing. And so that when I got, in order to get that, I knew I had to underexpose it. And then in post-processing, if I didn't do that, the highlights, especially in the reflection in the water, I wouldn't have been able to recover.
But you're going for depth and drama every time you do something like this. Is that your end goal?
You know, every photograph I do is going to be different based upon what I've visually seen. I'm always trying to bring the cameras, all our cameras are imperfect. They're getting much better. I hope they don't get too much better because that would take the fun out of processing. You know, if they did everything you did and they were always perfect. So I'm actually glad that they're flawed to some degree. So it gives us a chance in post to actually bring out what we actually saw and what we actually felt and experienced at that time in that moment. And that's what I try to do. And it was a pretty dramatic scene that I was visually seeing with the difference in luminosity values with shadow and light. So when I post-processed it, that's what I remembered seeing, and that's what I tried to achieve.
And Rachel wanted to know, is this a single frame or a stacked image?
This is a single frame. Like I said, I had to act very quickly. And so I just put at f11 ISO 100 and crossed my fingers. Because literally a minute later, that entire scene was fully lit. And the feeling of dark, light, dark, light, dark would have been gone. I mean, there's nothing particularly interesting about one big bright image, and that's why photographers typically don't shoot during the middle of the day, unless it's infrared. So anyway, any other questions?
So far, that's it right now.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm in Camera Raw now. And Camera Raw is quite similar to Lightroom. It has a lot of the same sliders. It's inherent in Photoshop. I like Camera Raw because then I don't have to go between Lightroom and Photoshop. It's all right there. So the first thing I did, if you look up at my histogram, it's way to the left, which means it's fairly dark. I can turn on the clipping and you can see that I have some really dark highlights here with blue. I'm going to turn that off. I don't want to completely bring the shadows out because that's part of what I had in my mind, which made it interesting, is the difference between shadow and light. So I am going to hit the exposure and I'm watching the histogram as it goes to the right. That's too much. I think for this one, I'm going to like 1.5 stops would probably be good. So you can already see I brightened it and I haven't had to, I mean, just by brightening and the exposure brought a lot of the shadows out. So I'm not going to touch the shadows slider at all. In fact, I'm going to bring the highlights down 20. Mainly because I'm very concerned about not blowing out here or here. I typically on my photos will bring the clarity and the dehaze up around 15. You can overdo clarity real quickly. and it'll get over contrasty. If you see, I turned it all the way to 100. I mean, it looks garish. So you want to be very careful on your clarity, and typically don't go above 15. It does add a little bit of contrast, which is nice, but it doesn't overdo it. Also on this one, I probably turn up the vibrance and the saturation, 15 to 20. I usually don't go above that. And, you know, it brightens up the colors nicely.
Rick, question is, do you usually go for a reality look, or do you artistically modify images with an alternate intention?
99.9% of the time I go for exactly what I'm seeing. So it's reality.
Okay.
So this is actually, I have a little bit more to do here, but this is closely matching what I experienced that morning. So I'm going to get out of camera raw, and I'm going to do a luminosity mask. And luminosity masks basically are a method, a selection of selecting part of your photo, and so that you can make adjustment only to that part that you want to impact. So I'm going to pick a luminosity mask, and in luminosity selections, light reveals and dark conceals. So what that means is anything that I apply an adjustment to is going to be impacting only what's light. In this case, we got the mountains, the clouds, and we also have the reflection down here. Now my reflection was already starting to get kind of blown out. So what I can do is grab a brush and I can actually paint this dark. And what that does, what I'm trying to do is eliminate what I don't want to have impacted by my adjustment. So this rock is a little bright. And so you can make luminosity masks on your own. They're fairly complicated. It's best to buy a panel. This one's called Pro Panel. There's another one called Tony Kuiper TK Panel. And usually they're under $50, but it allows you to do selections like this to really fine tune your photographs. So what I'm going to do is add a curves adjustment here. And so what I want, it's only going to affect what I had in that selection mask, which is the clouds, the mountain, and just a little bit of the foreground. So I'm going to grab it right here. I'm looking for an S curve. I'm going to try and take it as far as I can. What I'm trying to do is get even more drama between the lights and the darks. And put a slight contrast on it, like right there. And so, so that created an extra layer. So I'm going to go ahead and flatten that layer. I don't need it anymore. So I'm going to make just a few more adjustments with dodge, burn, and sponge tools. So typically when I have photographs like this where it goes from dark to light, I'll take a smaller brush and I just, I like keep the exposure around 10 to 15% on this. So I'm just going to brighten it right here on this edge here and then right here. So it creates even more contrast. I was able to control my highlights here. They're not blown out. I'm just going to put a little bit of stuff, brightness here. I'm going to bring my brush down in size, and I want to emphasize the leading line going up to the mountains. So I'm going to lighten a little bit in this waterfall area here. Just bring it up a little bit. Now I'm going to go to my burn tool, and I'm going to darken the foreground here, just in certain areas. Again, what I'm trying to do is get dark to light, and darken that a little bit.
So you're trying to lead the eye back to the money shot back there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but I also want all the elements to be interesting. You have interesting foreground with a little water or little stream waterfall with the flowers, and then the mid, which gives you the rocks and the water coming down, and then the payoff back here. I probably would put just a little more dodging up in these clouds.
You have just a few more minutes, Rick.
Okay. Let's see. The only other thing I would do is maybe just brighten up this a little bit. And so we can look at the before. So you can see it's much more impactful photograph now.
Great. Thank you. So Rick's quickly going through Photoshop. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Photoshop, I'm sure Douglas is going to add another Photoshop class for November, and maybe Rick will want to teach more of his Photoshop technique then.
It's possible. Yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's what
Any other questions? Let's see, what has been your best learning inspirations? People, books, video, etc.
Videos. I have my heroes. Josh Cripps is one of them, and a few in the Royce Bear and the Nightscapes. And they're all on YouTube. And oh my goodness, you can learn so much on YouTube. And it's free. You don't have to spend $5,000 on a class. And you can do it, you know, in the evening while you're, you know, getting ready to go to bed or something.
How do you feel your background in painting has helped you in photography?
Oh, only I would say composition wise, because I feel like I had an eye for composition, being a painter for a long time.
All right, great. Any other questions for Rick? Well, I thought that was really great to show us how you create drama and depth. And especially without getting too technical into Photoshop, which is easy to do.
Yeah, I picked one that was fairly simple to adjust. So.
Yeah, so thank you. Any final questions or any final comments, Rick?
Okay, I can send you the link.
Oh,
okay. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing now.
Okay, that's great. All right, well, thank you very much. And yeah, that was great. And you did exactly what we needed you to do. So let's move on to our next presenter, which will be Frank Bloksberg. So Frank, the show is yours.
Well, hi folks, can you see my screen?
Yep. Yes.
All right, that's me. The reason I'm starting with a picture of me is, well, I don't know most of you and you don't know most of me. I've been a member of the club for, I don't know, about 2 years now. Well, over half of that is from COVID. And the other half, I barely got to participate in the events. So anyway, that's me. Kathy asked me to participate in this to share my artistic vision of how I make certain types of images. And she really emphasized that this wasn't to be, at least for me, an opportunity to show off Photoshop geekery, which I really like to nerd out. So I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to show you any post-processing wizardry to the extent that I'm capable anyway. Won't open Photoshop or Lightroom. I'm just going to show you some ideas of how I got to making a particular portrait. You know, everything I'm going to say here is my own opinion. Don't think I'm suggesting that you ought to do something or that I know better or whatever. It's just what I do, and I'm just going to share. Hopefully, you'll enjoy it. So, hopefully, I can get this to work. Oh, looky. So, in my view, fine art photography is storytelling. And you know, I heard somebody talking. I was listening to a podcast today. I can't tell you who it was by. I'm so sorry. But he used the word fine art photography. Then he said, you know what? Maybe a better way of saying that is personally expressive photography. And I agree with him. And I wish I could have changed this slide because this what this is. What I'm going to be talking about is personally expressive photography from my perspective and its storytelling. And what I mean by that is that for me, again, photography is a visual communication process. When I have an idea that I want to make a photo of something, whether that thing is real and in front of me, or is something that I conjured up in my imagination, there's a reason I want to make that photograph. There's something I want to share about that thing that's interesting me. And that thing may be something beautiful or interesting or wistful, or I don't know what, but there's something I want to tell the viewer or even myself about this thing. And that thing is the subject of the photograph. The object of my photograph is to tell a story about the subject. And I think we call a story about a particular subject a portrait. Or in other words, I consider all of my personally expressive photography as portraits, no matter what it's about. It could be a mountain, it could be a bear, it could be a person, it could be anything. It's a portrait in my mind. I'm portraying this particular subject in a particular way, i.e., it's a portrait. And so now I want to tell a story as it relates to that. So last year's club challenge was, well, quite the challenge for me. I went to my area and man, oh man, I had a really hard time finding something. But near the beginning of it, I saw this little library. And I think actually Kathy saw something very similar to this, maybe even this one. And what I do is, if I'm looking to gather assets for a project or to come up with an idea, I just take a snapshot. I'm not trying to do anything other than document an idea, or even in this case, the germ of an idea. I don't know what to do yet, but I know that there's something I want to come back to. And so I took that shot and I went away and I looked for some more things and ultimately found some stuff. But I kept coming back here saying, what's the idea? What's the story here? I mean, just what is it? I didn't know, but really I think I did. And that is, the story is whoever made the thing. And whoever made the thing, hanging out with the thing, with this library, and maybe there's a story there. So that's where I'm thinking at that moment. So I kept coming back. I probably came back a half dozen times or something. Then I went home, and this photograph I probably took around dawn. And then I came back with my wife to the area, so maybe she would give me some ideas. And we went back to this spot a couple of times, and lo and behold, out came the fellow who made the little library. And here's my wife, Rochelle, chatting with Orville, O-R-V-A-L. And Orville is a very cool guy. He's different. You know, he was incredibly friendly. He was totally happy for me to take photos of him and do portraits of him with the little library. And, you know, I found him to be charming and nice and quirky and just a really excellent choice for a portrait that was a story, merely just a, hey, look what I saw. So this is Orville in his library, one of the shots I took. It's not the greatest portrait in the world or anything like that, not even that great of a capture, but it's got a little bit of action and whatnot, and it starts to tell a story. You can see Orville, he's wearing sandals with socks. He's wearing zip-off pants, you know, and he's well in his 80s. He's got his handlebar mustache, and he's pulling out books, and he really takes care of the books. This is his second time making the library. The first one fell apart, and so now he's made the second one much better. You can see all that went into making this piece. You know, it's really interesting. There's a flag on there, and there's a belt. I don't remember what the belt was about. Excuse me. He really takes care of it and all of that. And I thought, okay, there's a story about that. And I don't know yet what to say, but I do know that here, I can't really tell a story about Orville and his library because the background is just competing and he's lost. And the subject, Orville and the library, whether that's two subjects or one subject, I don't know. But that is all lost in the background. So what I do is when there's something that doesn't add to the story that I want to tell, and I'm not doing photojournalism here. If you ask me the question, do I usually, in a photograph or a project like this, do I usually have what I saw or what's my vision? It's my vision. I have no problem at all utterly changing everything, with the exception that since the portrait of a human, I'm not going to lie about Orville. So I'm not going to make him something completely different. But anyway, that background, it doesn't work. It needs to go, so it's gone. And, you know, I just masked him out. I had to have him standing on the ground. Obviously, he can't just be floating in space, or whatever story we would try to tell. would be incoherent. And so there's that. And now I need to figure out what to do with the background. Well, one of the really good ways of filling large spaces of empty space is to use textures. And you can create all sorts of different worlds with textures. And I like to use multiple textures, blend them together to get all sorts of different looks. Now, what I wanted here was, now at this point, I'm pre-visualizing. I'm really starting to know what I want this thing to look at the end. And so I want to have complementary colors that I'm going to be able to tie in and give a coherent color grade to the photo, which it doesn't quite have yet. And I'm going to, it's outside, the library is kind of grungy and all that. And so I want that kind of a noisy, maybe gritty background, but not too much, because I don't want to take away from his charm. But I want to keep the quirkiness and all of that. Also, there's books. And so if I can have words, I want to have words. And so I go ahead and went through all sorts of textures. I don't remember if I had textures that I wanted, or I went out and I bought more textures so I could get what I wanted. You can see here, even though we're on Zoom, you see that's a pretty noisy background, and that's deliberate. The way I got a consistent color grade is that I let that background, to a small extent, be over the library and over Orville. So he shares the color with the background. Again, I'm not looking to make this photojournalism. I'm trying to tell the story that this is a really cool guy who's different and who's fun, and there they are. And then, so I looked for words to layer on there. I couldn't find anything I quite liked. I found a bunch of newspapery type things, but I didn't like any of that. But then I found some words that were in French. And then I thought, well, why not? He's quirky, that's cool. And so I added the words. I added that little filigree on the right because why not? It's cool, it's fun, it's quirky, and gave it its title, Orville and His Library. And I don't know about you, but I think that this ties in nicely. It shows the charm of the guy, and it tells my version of the story that I have for Orville. I'm not trying to tell his story. I'm trying to tell my understanding or my story of that, what I had with him, so that half hour that I spent with him. That's all I've got, folks. If you have any questions, grand. If not, thank you for your time.
Well, thank you very much, Frank. Let's see if anybody has questions for, Mike wanted to know if you showed Orville his picture or gave it to him.
I have not. I do plan on doing it, but I just haven't yet.
Oh, so you still have one more step.
I certainly have one more step. I probably have two more steps, but I should probably print it and give it to him if he likes it.
And where do you get your backgrounds?
Oh, I just bought them offline. I can't tell you right offhand. I bought textures from a few different places. I have quite a number of them. They're really useful in my view. I like them a lot.
Okay, all right. Do you make your own textures too?
No. I understand it's not that difficult, but they're not that expensive that I can get a whole lot more really, really nice textures before I go through doing it myself.
Okay. Mark is saying, so symbolism is important to your images. Do you have to brainstorm or do they just come to you?
Yeah. I brainstorm in the way that I described to you. I research the subject so that I understand more about the subject than if I were just wandering by. I think I can only tell a story if I understand something more than, oh, hey, look at this cool thing. Once I've done that, then the symbolism will come to me.
So you spend a little more time not even working on the photograph. You actually spend time just sitting there thinking about what you're getting from this image.
Yeah, and in advance of even taking the image, I'll do my snapshots so that I can start to think about what the image might be. And at that point, I really do want to do a little bit of research. If I can possibly spend time like with Orville, like we did, then I'll do that. Because I don't want to make it up if I can help it, because Orville's really cool. And I want to share that coolness that I experienced and tell that story.
Let's see, Mark wants to know, where did you get your process from? I'm not sure. Mark, do you want to
I understand that question. That's a really, really good question. I grew up, my dad was an artist, and from a very young age, he collected art. And for me, from a very young age, art dealers used to come to our house with portfolios full of all different types of art. The Impressionists, Surrealists, all sorts of art. And I was taught from an early age about what that was, and started to understand from those explanations, and then the reading that I did about art history, about some of these processes. And then, just from experiencing life.
Oh, that's interesting. Good. Great. Thanks very much. All right. Thank you very much, Frank.
You're welcome.
You could stop sharing now.
I will stop sharing.
All right. Appreciate you taking the time to share this with us.
You're welcome.
All right. Good. And hopefully when we all get back together again, you can all meet Frank in person. He's come to a couple of our field trips, and so we've had a chance to chat in person, but not a lot of meetings. So welcome. All right. Next we have on our list is Dave McLellan. So Dave, the show is yours.
All right, thank you. I'm going to share my screen here. Get this up. Slideshow. There we go. Do you see?
Yes.
All right. So my subject tonight is using your passions for your inspiration. And I'm going to talk about what I do to go beyond the photograph and achieve what I see in my vision. And what that means is, if all the required parameters for a shot can't be met, then what can you do? And so I like to work with photo projects that focus on a subject that's something I'm passionate about. And I like to create what I call photographic art. And that is taking my photographs and making them something more with post-processing tools. I use Photoshop almost exclusively, Camera Raw and Photoshop. I don't have Lightroom, and so I've never learned that. And you can see I've had my landscapes. These are some brochures that I've had my landscapes, and I created a guitar art project with all the band gear that the guys in my band have. And for my bicycle art, I'm an avid bicycle rider and have toured all over Northern California. And I was able to time an Artist of the Month show at the Nevada City Winery that coincided with the first Amgen tour, the California bike race that started here in Nevada City. And then I was inspired to develop a project to shoot the colorful and historic buildings of Grass Valley in Nevada City. I've always enjoyed the old photos depicting the histories of our town. And so I thought I should try and capture the history of now. And in 100 years, these will be the old photos. And so my inspiration, I'm going to mention an artist, and the common reaction for photographers is to probably groan. But my inspiration for this project was actually the painter Thomas Kincaid. And he saturated the market to the extent that he gets that groaning kind of reaction a lot. But if you think about the first time you saw one of his paintings, it evoked a reaction, and it's evoked an emotion. It's kind of a primal romantic emotion. You're in the rugged mountains, it's stormy and wet and it's cold, but there's a cozy cottage over there by the stream, and the windows are all bright. It's warm and inviting. There's a little trail of smoke coming up. It's welcoming you in, and you want to go there. And that's how I feel about living here in Nevada City and Grass Valley. I love the misty mountain setting, the timeless look of the old buildings when you're at Victorian Christmas or Cornish Christmas, and it's cold and it's wet. Christmas lights are on, the windows are reflecting in the wet streets. The shops are warm and bright and welcoming you in. And that's the feeling I wanted to capture in my photographs. The problem was back then that it was the middle of May and summer was coming on strong. I needed stormy weather, I needed lights in the windows, I needed rain-streaked streets, and the Christmas lights needed to be turned on the buildings. But the problem was the shops were all closed before it even got dark, and it wasn't going to rain for months. And I didn't want to wait for winter, so I decided to figure out how to use a photograph as a starting point and then develop my vision from there using Photoshop. So I got lucky a few times during the summer, and we had some cloudy days and brief rainstorms, and that's when I went out and shot all over town. And the first problem that I realized I was going to have was with cars in the streets. Not only were they a distraction in my compositions, but they were driving where I needed to be standing in the middle of the street. And at first I didn't worry about it and figured that I was capturing the history of now and the distractions were okay. And then I started watching the weather more closely. When we had little rainstorms, I began getting up before dawn when there were no cars and I didn't have to worry about standing in the middle of the street to get my shots. So here's some shots of the winter buildings around town. And if you want to try it, I discovered with a lot of experimenting that Sunday mornings, just as the storm is starting to lift, is the best time. You get that sunrise light coming up under the clouds while the mist is rising. Streets are still wet and there are no cars parked in the way. And as the storm is lifting, it may still be raining a little bit, but it's not typically enough to cause a problem with your gear getting too wet. And you see, except for the shot of Broad Street looking down where there's one truck parked on the side there, I was really lucky in finding no cars in the way to distract the image that I was looking for. It's a tough requirement to meet, but when it works, it's really fun. And so anyway, I was back and it was summer and it wasn't going to rain. And so what do I do? So here's a bracketed shot. I was on Broad Street walking up with my camera tripod over my shoulder, and it was probably 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and light was terrible, although there were some clouds, so the sun wasn't too bad. And I freaked out when I saw, oh my gosh, there's a police car parked right in front of City Hall with no other cars in the way. Awesome. So here's a bracketed shot. I always did that because of the terrible light that I was always experiencing. The shadows were too dark, the lights were too blown out, and so I decided to start using an HDR program called Photomatics. And it's a great little program for combining multiple exposures. It only costs $99. It's the same price it's been since I got it 12 years ago. You get free upgrades, and I highly recommend it for if you want to take your photos in a different direction. You can keep things real, and I typically try to do that for the most part. In this case, I'm definitely not.
Dave, can you explain what HDR is briefly?
High dynamic range is what you see in these three pictures. The first one is a center exposure. The top one is what your normal exposure center line would look like. The bottom one is a one step down, and the middle one is one step down, so it's much darker, and the lower one is a step up, so it's brighter. And then I can take that into the program, and it goes through some iterations mathematically and combines them into one image.
So when you're talking about steps, you're talking about f-stops.
F-stops, yes.
Great.
Yeah. +1, -1. And my camera will do that automatically by setting that. And it takes all three shots at once, bam, bam, bam. And so that way when things are moving, it typically will catch them without them changing too much. And this one, the flag up over City Hall was wiggling a little bit, and in the final image that was there, but I didn't really worry about that. And so you can see the midlight, sun is terrible. The sun is behind the clouds, so that helped with the contrast a little, and the clouds added the detail I wanted in the sky. But the streets are dry, the windows are dark and in shadow. Christmas lights are off, vignettes in the corner with the polarizer, but I'm not too worried about that. And so here's the combined HDR version using Photomatics. That looks like. And so what I started doing is I selected the sky and processed that a little bit darker to get that winter feel. Then I cropped out the vignettes in the corner and selected the street and processed it with some Gaussian blur to make it feel a little wet. And then I selected the police car and made a copy and mirrored it with some warping and perspective adjustments to create its reflection. And then for the lights in the windows, you can kind of see underneath where the city hall is up there, the golden the CI, there's a light in that window. I used a rectangle tool and created a single rectangle for each window on its own layer and made them fit using the warp and skew tools. And then I used the layer styles tool to add a warm glow, inner and outer glow, and adjusted the opacity to give it that look like there's lights on inside.
Dave, can you explain in a little more detail how you get the reflection in the street?
I selected the street to be its own layer, and then applied a Gaussian, and I erased, there was potholes and painted lines, and I went in Photoshop and I blended all of those things out so it was just a uniform gray, and then used a Gaussian blur, which is an effect in Photoshop, and that kind of gives it a wet look. And then I selected the police car individually to its own layer and then flipped it over, mirroring it vertically, and kind of stretched it so that the tires would kind of match and made the reflection have the semblance of an actual reflection on a wet street.
Cool. And also, did you search out examples of this type of city photography, or was this concept all created in your head?
No, this was all in my head. That's what I was saying. I had this passionate vision of the Thomas Kincaid idea of the warm winter picture of the buildings around town. But the problem was it was the middle of summer and I didn't want to wait till winter to start my project. So I had to figure out how to do this. And so here's to the next one here. So here's
I'm just going back real quick. You had this idea about Thomas Kincaid, but before that, where did you get that? What led you to that thought?
We have a puzzle that my mother-in-law made of the Thomas Kincaid picture that was hanging in our bedroom. And it just has that nice cabiny look we've always liked. So that was kind of that. And then it was just seeing the old black and white or brown and white pictures of 100 years ago of town, and just the idea of documenting town today, that someday will be the old photographs that people can look back on and go, oh, wow, look, when things used to be just color and not three-dimensional or full immersion. Yeah.
So was it sort of like a free-floating thought that one thing led to another to get you to this place?
Pretty much, yeah. I don't really recall. This was 10 years ago. When I first started, this is with a first Canon DSLR, a D10, I think it was. And I didn't know how to use it manually. And so it was a huge learning curve. I didn't know how to use Photoshop like this either. So anyway, I'll move on. So here you can see the final artwork. And
there's one more question. Oh, sorry. Jim said you did a lot of selections and it's not as easy as it sounds. He wants you to show as an example of selection, especially where the edges are irregular. But you know what? This isn't for that type of showing Photoshop selection. So I just want to say to Jim, if he wants to see more about Photoshop, I think the November workshop is where that will happen.
Yeah, that's way more depth than it's going to happen.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Dave.
Okay. And so here's jump to the next one. There's the final artwork. And so you can see for the Christmas lights that are all now lit, I created a paintbrush pattern of a starburst and painted a starburst over every single Christmas light bulb across the tops of the buildings, and decided that that wasn't quite enough. So I added a little round brush dot over each bulb as well to add that brightness. And then I added an occasional light dot and starburst inside some of the building windows, so it looks like there's lamps on. The street lamp and the police car headlights and the tail lights are all done the same way, using a skewed filled rectangle or a starburst brush. And then I adjusted this size and opacity of each piece of light to fit the mood. And after I had all the layers the way I wanted them, I flattened the image and used a touch of the dry brush filter and the cutout filter to give it a little more of a not quite real, more of a surreal look. And then again, some more of a Gaussian blur to give it that painterly and wet look, like it's raining. And then I added a signature border effect in my title that I did on all of my images back then when I was going to have them printed for display. And when I started this artwork, I had no idea how to do any of the processes I ended up using. This was before YouTube. And so there were only a few forums and the actual Photoshop manual to try and figure out how to make these ideas come to life. But the point of all this is that because I was inspired by my passionate desire to capture a specific feeling, I was able to experiment and learn, and most importantly, still have it be fun. And this piece of art ended up taking several days, and it has 79 layers.
Wow.
So here's another bracketed set of the back of the Nevada City winery. And I knew it was rare to see the barrels lined up like this, but it was August and they were preparing for the harvest. And so I took advantage of the parking lot being pretty much empty and the cool barrel is out there. Hard to see now, but there's some flowers and some buckets. And you can see the light is just terrible. It's probably, again, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, middle of summer. And the only thing I had was some clouds in the sky. And so I was out shooting.
Dave, Tom wants to know why it was so important to create this image in summer versus trying to capture it when it really happened.
I did not want to wait. I wanted to do this now. I had the vision in my head and started working it and was shooting all over town doing the buildings like the earlier slide that showed the colorful buildings in Grass Valley, Nevada City. And so here's the final version of the back of Nevada City Winery, where I kind of did all the same ideas that I used on the first one, put in the Christmas lights, put the lights in all the windows, lit the lamps and made light beams here and there, cropped out the piece of the truck that was in the way, bumped up the textures. And to me, this has that Thomas Kincaid look and feel that I was after. And so that worked out.
Mark wants to know what parts of your illustration background come into play in your photography.
I have a little bit of illustration as a graphic designer. It was not my career by any stretch of the imagination. I was a circuit board designer at Grass Valley Group for, that was my career. But that was an artistic process as well. And I've always photographed, but was never considered myself an artist at it. I took landscape pictures primarily. But at work, I was able to start using Photoshop in the drafting department. I volunteered to be the guy who would develop the website that showed all of our processes and how-to steps that would help teach new designers that were coming into to work. And so I got to get a copy of Photoshop 4. I actually got to take it home and load it on my home computer so I could learn even more. And my knowledge developed from there. But it wasn't until I started this process with my new digital camera that I needed to learn more than just how to do text and things like that. Anyway, I'll wrap it up here. And so over the course of a year or so, I was able to create, print, and frame a large portfolio of our local architecture, all with my own personal twists, the history for 100 years from now. And I'm proud to have been able to display them at shows around town over the years since, and including at the Colorful and Historic Buildings Camera Club show that's now at Nevada City Picture Frame. And like I mentioned in the beginning, for me, it's about shooting projects of things I love to do, my music and my bicycle. And I know them intimately, and that's what keeps them interesting while I'm working. And so my question to you is, what are you passionate about? Go and document it down to the finest detail and with your own artistic vision. Thanks. Questions?
Let's see. Anne wanted to know how long it took you to complete that first one. She said it was beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that was probably 2 to 3 days. And it was a lot of stopping and having to study and experiment to try and figure out how to do stuff.
Okay. Other questions? All right.
No, okay,
Oh.
stop share.
Oh, main learning tools. I think you said, or you didn't say.
Oh, yeah, I mentioned that this was before YouTube, and so there were forums back then for Photoshop users that you could kind of go in and search for questions. Although the search tools were terrible back then too, but there was Photoshop had manuals, and so you would go buy a book and learn how to do it by reading an actual book.
So what about today? What are your main learning tools today?
Main learning tools today is definitely YouTube. Go in, ask any question, get 10 answers, and utilize it immediately. Love it. Like Rick mentioned, it's the greatest tool in the world.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Dave. That was great. And I think that provided a lot of inspiration. I like hearing the moving from seeing the puzzle on your wall to getting the idea that you would do the Nevada City in that style. So
thank you.
The flow is what I'm fascinated with. So thank you. Okay, let's move on to George Pelpel.
Okay, do you see my screen?
Yes.
So, Kathy asked me to describe the creative process behind one of my images. I thought this one would be a good candidate. It is the result of the techniques I first tried that day and currently frequently used for my landscape photography. So this day I had a goal. This is a location I wanted to go for a long time. Unfortunately, it was very far from the Bay Area where I used to live, and also it is on private land. I tried to connect with the former owner, the casino owner, but got nowhere. In April 2019, I was coming back from Bend, Oregon. I decided to come back through the Eastern California, Nevada route. I wanted to see pronghorn antelopes, which I saw, not many of them. And I had the goal to stop at the Fly Geyser, which is in the Black Rock Desert, just north of Gerlach. If you are familiar with Burning Man, it is about 8 miles north of the playa. So the goal I had was to drive in the evening, arrive late in the evening, spend the night in the car, and wake up at 4 a.m. to shoot the Milky Way over the Fly Geyser. April is a good time to see the whole Milky Way in the southeast sky. So the plan was pretty good, except that when I woke up, the sky was full of clouds, so I couldn't see the Milky Way. Went back to sleep in the car and woke up just about at sunrise. So I had to adapt to the situation and enjoy the moment. So first, before I go to the image, I would like to talk about my learning process. I started studying photography seriously in my 30s. Before that, I let the camera decide things for me. And obviously, I had to buy Ansel Adams' books. And so I bought the trilogy, the camera, the negative, and the print. These are the books I will recommend for somebody starting in photography. They are extremely technical. But Ansel Adams was a fantastic teacher. One of the remarkable things about these 3 books at the time, what I thought at the time, that they all started with the same first chapter. The chapter was called Visualization. When you are starting photography, it's a little bit scary because it makes you realize that you have to know what, in order to be a photographer, you have to know what the photograph, the final photograph will be before you press the shutter. But actually, it's a very important concept. And you start getting it through your mind by practicing. And I will use basically the same title as Ansel used in these books to explain the process I went through creating that photograph of the fly guide. So the camera was basically the work I did in composing the image, and then the focal length I used. Actually, I only had one lens with me. It was a 28 millimeters. I got rid of all my zooms and decided to work with prime lenses. So it forces me to be engaged in the composition. So I move around a lot, but I have to be flexible, and actually it worked pretty good. What Ansel Adams called the negative, in today's world, it would be the camera sensor. That's our negative. And we have to try to optimize the capabilities of the sensor that is in our camera. And the last process, what Ansel calls the print, it's what we do in the computer when we are at home. So the composition, I like this quote from Justin Black. It was from an article he had in Outdoor Photographer, and he compared painting with photography. And he said that painting was the art of addition, because a painter starts from a white canvas and adds whatever he or she thinks is appropriate. For us photographers, we often start with, especially nature shooter, we often start with a very busy and messy palette of intertwined elements. So we have to work in trying to eliminate some distractions from the main subject. And Justin Black calls that the art of subtractions. So what I'm looking for when I am composing, I try to look for clean, simple compositions. I move them around to try to eliminate destructive elements that are around my subject. I try to look for lines and objects that brings the viewer's eyes to the main attraction. The camera viewfinder always had the grid lines on. They help me to use the rule of thirds, which is a simplified version of the golden means, but it allows me to arrange the elements of a picture in a pleasing fashion. I try to find a balanced composition. So I try to compare the weight of the main subject in relation to secondary subject. And I try to determine how the viewer's eyes flows within the composition. Is there something that pulls the eye of the main subject or out of the frame? So I try to eliminate that and control it. I always check the frame edges. It's called a border patrol. So my eye in the viewfinder is spinning around, trying to see everything that would distract from what I am trying to tell. And I try to visualize what the final crop will be. I often shoot wider to accommodate post-processing perspective corrections. And I think it's something that works very well in landscape photography, but also if you do travel photography, if you shoot buildings, I always shoot wider, so like that I can correct the lines and still keep everything I want from the subject. So once a composition is decided on, I shoot a lens. Usually I am a big fan of extra wide lenses. My landscape lens for years has been 14 millimeter. So I like to show the wide landscape. Usually creates dynamic compositions. It emphasizes the foreground, but unfortunately sometimes the background is way back and loses a lot of weight in the composition. So this was a morning shot.
George, could you just get closer to the microphone for us, please?
Okay.
Thank you.
was shot as 10 millimeter on the full frame camera. And the Sierra looks very, very far. The previous evening, the story was different. It was sunset during, I think, I don't remember the name of the fire, but it was the fire that was on the other side. And so I wanted to emphasize the sign of the smoke and the high Sierra. So I chose a longer focal length instead of a 10 millimeter. I went to 20. Compressed the distance. I gave much more weight. What I wanted to get. So this was the technique I used as the guide. So now, what about the negative? Camera sensor. Much of the marketing brouhaha is about pixels, number of pixels. To me, the most important specs I'm looking for in a sensor is what they call the dynamic range. It used to be, in the film days, it used to be called latitude. And in the digital world, it's called dynamic range. Dynamic range is the number of different tonalities that the sensor can separate. To give you an example, the human eye, which is the best sensor in the world, can differentiate up to 21 different values. When we use light films, we only have like 5 to 7 values, 9 to 10. The best sensors nowadays offer about 14 different values at base ISO. And this is very important, base ISO. As you can see on this curve, this is the one for the camera I use, the Nikon D850. This is a Sony sensor, so all the Sony's Alpha 7, Alpha 9 use the same sensor. I read that Canon R6 and R5.
Hold on a second, George.
Oh, no. So sorry.
There we go. Okay. George, you want to back up a little bit because you're muted.
Okay, so this is the curve, the dynamic range curve of a sensor. All modern sensors have about the same curve nowadays. So you see the impact of going to a faster ISO. So best ISO would be the left one. My camera is about ISO 64. But once you go to ISO 400, you are losing at least 2 stop values of dynamic range. So when you are looking to shoot landscape, I think it's important for people to use the best ISO of a camera. So when I'm shooting, when I am at the fly geyser, I was, number one, I was kind of disappointed by the geyser. And on top of that, the light was not very good. The light was coming from the back of the geyser. As you can see on the right of this image of the platform, when I was on the platform, the sun was on the side, but the steam was blowing towards me and the sun, so I couldn't see the colors on the other side. So I started to turn around and wanted to get close. I was using a 28 millimeter. And it was the first time I had read it was easy to stitch images in Lightroom. So I decided to give it a try. I wanted to show the wide view and yet be close from the geyser. So the light, I am always looking for drama. I'm always looking for exciting light. So I am looking for the edges between the shadows and the highlights. So this is extremely wide range of tonality, with the center of the frame being the lightest and the left side of the center line is the blackest. So I use the camera meter to take a test shot, which is an average exposure. And then I am in camera is RAW and base ISO. And I decide to use an optimum aperture to have enough depth of field and good image quality. So I was at f8 here. And the camera mode is manual. I am always in manual. So once I have my average exposure, I look at the histogram and I change the shutter speed to move to expose to the right. So I know maybe you remember what we heard a month ago. Someone said that exposing to the right is good. I don't agree. I think it's very important, especially if you shoot landscape, and especially if you want to have dramatic light. The only subject where I will expose to the left would be for sports or wildlife photography, because I don't care about losing details in the shadow. The important factor in action photography is to freeze the frame. So if you want a sharp bird, you will have to expose to the left as much as you can. Every stop you move to the left, you reduce the shutter speed by half. So in landscape, I expose to the right, and I turn the wheel until my highlights are as deep as the edge. I don't want to see a white line along the right edge. I want to be close, but not on the edge. If the sun is dark on your composition, that's fine. The sun can be on the right edge.
George, you only have a couple of minutes left. Just to, you only have,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay, so here you can see that my histogram includes everything. Nothing was clipped. So I was comfortable, and then I could shoot my 5 frames. So this is what I shot. And after that, I was ready to do the post-processing. I always start with Lightroom, and merging the 5 images is very simple. You select them, control click or right click, use select photo merge and panorama. That's simple. And then you have options. So this is what you get. Lightroom is very powerful at doing stitching. So you can try the different projection, spherical or cylindrical. I use cylindrical here. You can use the fill edges option to fill the blanks around the frame. I didn't do it here because I knew I wanted to crop. And you can use also auto setting that simplifies the post-processing for you. So then I do my first post-processing in Lightroom. And what I'm doing here, I only work on the background. I don't care what happens to the foreground yet. That will be done in Photoshop. So I make the adjustment, and these are my standard adjustments. I use profile camera portrait. Don't ask me why. I think it reduces contrast. It makes softer tonal transitions. Maybe it's not the best, but that's what I use. I change the white balance to usually cloudy. And I reduce the highlights. Sometimes work on the whites and the blacks, and increase saturation by vibrance. Okay. Once my Lightroom work is done, then I go to Edit, Control click, Edit in Photoshop, where I create a second layer. I do a duplicate layer, erase the background of this second layer, this will be my foreground layer. And what I do here, I increase, the background here was not lighted by the sun. So it had no saturation. So I wanted it to reflect what I was seeing on the site. And I wanted the foreground to balance with the background. So I increase the shadow. I work with the shadows, highlights, vibrant saturation, brightness. And I try to create a good balance between the foreground and the background. Then I work on the macro adjustments of the foreground. And I use the standard tools, dodging and, and burning. Here I wanted to dodge a line from the corner to the geyser itself, so that the eye was moving from the left to the right. And what I did after that, I wanted to reduce the highlights of the water more. I wanted to open the shadows of the colorful area just at the bottom of the main column. And then I flattened the image using the merge layer. And then I did my final adjustments, which was perspective correction. I was using a slightly wide focal, 28mm. The camera was aiming upwards. So I needed to correct that perspective. I decide on the final cropping. I add a little bit of igniting to darken the corners. And I work on general contrast. And I found out there were still remnants of the platform on the right side, so I cloned it out using the glass that was. And basically that was it. So what I'm doing basically is nicely explained by Susan Shea. I am basically reacting to the light. Everything we do is about the light, the sunlight that reflects on color, makes the colors alive, and create the dramas within a shot. And finally, I will share a quote that I found in the Banana Republic store in Union Square in San Francisco. It's just above the Grand Staircase. I always find it interesting. It's from Picasso. Along the rules like a force, you can break them like an artist. So I am not sure I am an artist. I did break a rule, however, that day. I jumped over the fence, but at a big warning, no trespassing. So I don't know if it counts to be an artist, but
all right. All right, well, thank you. Thank you very much, George. I would take questions, but we really need to move on to Mike Shea. So if you could stop sharing. Yes. There we go. Thank you very much. And if we have time at the end, or maybe somebody can talk to George privately about his art. But thank you very much. That was a very detailed explanation of a very complicated process, I think. But thanks, I appreciate it. So Mike Shea, you're on.
I don't see the share screen. Okay, there I am.
There you are.
You see my slide?
No, you're not sharing the screen yet. You have to hit the green share screen at the bottom of your toolbar. There you go. You got it.
All right. So like George, I also got some inspiration from Ansel Adams. And then during the my film days, when I was doing darkroom work, I came across this quote. Oops, excuse me. And it really stuck with me for the last 20, 25 years. So what Adams is saying, he says, many consider my photographs to be in the realistic category. Actually, what reality they have is in their optical image accuracy. Their values are definite departures from reality. So that quote gave me inspiration to explore my images and take them beyond what just the camera saw. And it also, I have up there justification because, you know, people sometimes go, oh, if it was Photoshopped, you know, there's something phony about it. And I don't think that's the case. I think that, you know, if you knew what film people did in the darkroom, they had a lot of processes available to change their images, just like we do today. I mean, granted, we have way more than they did, but they did have a lot of things that they could do to change what their image looks like. So what we're going to do is go through a trip I took to a place called Bowling Ball Beach, which is just south of Point Arena on the California coast. And when I saw these rocks, these bowling balls, I was like, oh man, you know, I know that there's some good pictures here. And I had these dreams of making this masterpiece landscape or seascape image, and it's going to be hanging in a great museum. And I'm going to be famous and all this, but that hasn't happened yet. So let's get back to reality. So what I'd like you to see in this image is a spit of land out here, and then the ground here underneath the balls. And that's going to come into play in a little bit. So here's a couple of images I took a little bit later from this trip. So you can see the same spit of land, and hopefully you'll see what some water and some clouds can do, you know, from that to that. And here's another one. So in my vision, you know, there was a lot that I could take out of these bowling balls. So what I started to do was plan my trips. And the most important thing was to research the tides that were going to be there. And what I was looking for was something that wasn't too low, because if it was too low, the balls would be totally exposed. And if the tide was too high, you couldn't see them at all. So I was looking for some in-between tides. I wanted them around the time of sunset. So I had to know what the tides were, I had to know when sunset was. And then as I got closer to my planned trips, I was looking at the weather because I really wanted some clouds. To me, if you don't have clouds in the sky on a landscape or seascape, there's kind of no sense in taking it. I also kind of thought about what extra equipment I would need. So you see I have 2 neutral density filters. One's an overall filter that's going to affect the entire exposure. And then this one over here is a graduated neutral density filter. So if the sky is a lot brighter than the rest of the scene, I can use that filter to adjust the exposure on the sky. I also wanted to take a remote shutter release to trip the shutter on my camera. And then I was going to take waders because I was going to be walking out into the water. I was going to have my tripod in the water and be taking pictures from standing in the water. I also brought a spray bottle with distilled water and soft cloth so that I could wipe down the lens if it got salt water on it, and then wipe down my camera afterwards. So what we're going to do is going to go, we're going to go through one of these images. And you'll see on the left, this is what I took with the camera. And on the right, this is what I ended up with after I processed it. And my goal was to have an image that looked realistic. And if you didn't see the one on the left, I would hope that you would think the one on the right was a realistic looking image. So let's go through the steps of that. My goals when taking the photo were, first off, not to blow out, well, first off was not to get down by a wave. When I was a young guy, I was showing off for a girlfriend by standing on a breakwater up by Citro's Bath in San Francisco. And a wave came over my head and crashed down on me. Unfortunately, it was over my head and it knocked me to my knees. And then when it washed out, I had a really low center of gravity, so it didn't wash me off the breakwater. And it really impressed my girlfriend. It impressed her how dumb I was to get out there in the first place. The other thing I wanted to do was protect my camera. I didn't want it, you know, falling into the water. And what happened was, as I found out because of the wave action, instead of using that remote shutter release, I used the let me think here. A process on my camera where I could delay delay the shutter, and I would hold the tripod down because the waves, you know, I don't want them moving the tripod. The other thing is there was, other than this thin bank of clouds right along the horizon here, the sky was just totally clear. So I didn't want to show the boring sky. I wanted a level horizon. So I used the virtual horizon feature on my camera to get the horizon almost level. I wanted the silty water look like this, which is where the neutral density filter came into play. I wanted the bowling balls in focus. So I shot at f11 to try to get all the balls in focus. So when I opened the image in Photoshop, the first thing I did was I changed the temperature from the 3400 Kelvin that it was shot at to 7500, which is the white balance for Shea. Now I could have done this at the time I took the picture, but since I could do it in post-processing, I just went with what the camera shot the image as. And then as you see, there's a whole bunch of adjustments I made over on this side of what I was looking for. I wanted not to have the sun blown out, and I wanted not to have it so dark that I lost all the details in the bowling balls here. Once I had the image open, my next step was to define to me what were the key elements that I might want to work with. And those were the rocks. So you can see I selected the rocks. I've got the marching ants around them, the thin layer of clouds along here, and then the sky up here. So I made those three selections, and the tools that I used primarily were the object selection tool in Photoshop. And basically, when you click on that, you can just outline one of these balls, and it does a pretty darn good job of selecting them. You have to do some refinements, but it does a pretty darn good job. And then also for the sky, I go to select and then sky, and it does a really good job of selecting the sky. So these tools really shorten the process of making selections. And I usually do a lot of selections in my work because I'm going to be working on different elements of the photos. So now what I'm going to do is walk you through what I did on the sky. So the top one here is what I started out with. I wanted to give more contrast to the clouds, so I lowered the, I wanted to lower the overall value of the sky. So that's this one, this layer here, and then I wanted to give more contrast to the clouds. So you can see from here, if you go down here, there's a little bit more contrast. Then, sorry, I've got a little window on my computer, so it's kind of taking up where I can see. So the clouds over on this side had a little bit, they were a little bit warmer that you don't see here. So I increased the saturation on this section of the cloud. And then if you look over here and look over here, well, this is a lot warmer over here. So I wanted to tone that down. So I decreased the saturation over here. And then I slightly increased the overall saturation. So I started out up here and I ended up with down here.
Mike, how did you get the original vision of the image that you wanted?
Just by, when I started working on it, I wanted it to be a lot warmer than the, I'll go back. I wanted it to be warmer than what you see here. And I wanted the bowling balls to be able to, you can see the interaction of the ball. I want the interaction of the balls in the water, and I wanted a sort of a dramatic sky. I mean, just things as I started going along, these are what I started working on. So next I started working on the bottom of the photo. So now that was taken at sundown, so this is really too light, in my opinion, to have a realistic look. So the next thing I did is I toned the whole thing down. And then I wanted to tone the water down even more. So I toned the water down. And then I'm looking at it and I'm going, well, these balls here to me look too bright. So I toned those down. But then they also looked too warm. If you look at some of these over here and up here, and then you look at these, well, these are a lot warmer. So I didn't like that. So I toned those down and just kept a little warmth at the top of the balls where the sun reflected. And then I also used to increase the saturation just a little bit on this section of the photo here, so that you've got this line here from sun going in this way or taking you out the other way. And that's how I ended up with this image, and that's that was my thing. So, I started out having this vision of a picture somewhat like this with this very dramatic sky and, these crashing waves. Although now I realize that if I'd done the crashing waves, it probably would have wiped out my camera and knocked me down. So the closest I could get to it, was this image, which, kind of more the silky water. And I like the sky on this one. It was kind of dramatic. So these were pictures that I took at this beach, and other questions.
That was cool. So it looks like where did you see that original frame photo?
The original photo is called Westwards. Hold on a second. Let me find it. No, I think it's Western Skylines by an artist, and I inherited this picture from my dad. It doesn't have the bowling balls in it, obviously. I photoshopped those bowling balls in. It's kind of like, this was my vision, right? So the picture is this big picture without the bowling balls.
Oh my gosh, I never would have even known that.
Yeah.
That's really good. So you actually have this photo, this painting in your house.
Yeah, this painting is huge. Yeah, it's in my house.
Okay, all right, that's great. Because as we're listening to everybody, it's like people started with almost a classical piece or another piece of art, and then changed it into their idea.
Yeah, I end up getting a lot more inspiration, I think. Well, I shouldn't say a lot more, but I end up getting a lot of inspiration from paintings and photographs, but a lot from paintings. I really admire paintings.
And do you have an art background?
No, I don't.
Oh, so Rachel said, having just been there, the waiters are a great idea. I filled my shoes repeatedly. All right.
I have one other, really quick little thing to go through, if it's okay, if you have time.
I don't think we do. I'm really sorry.
Okay, it's not important.
Pushing it here, and I really wanted to let everybody have enough time, but everybody's done a great job. So how quick is it?
No, it's okay. I've already stopped the share. We're good.
Oh, okay. Well, then I want to thank all of you gentlemen. I think we learned a lot from each one of you. It's really interesting to see your different approaches. And Mark just wrote outstanding, fantastic. So obviously his questions got answered. Yay. So Rachel, turn it over to you so you can do the intermission and all the other things you need to do.
All right, thank you. So thank you, everybody. I was making notes and learned from each and every one of you. So well done. And so we're going to take a break. Was looking at the time, pretty short one, about 5 minutes. And when we come back, I'll announce the winners from April's best of each of the categories. And then we'll move into the critique. So, and our judges tonight are Chris Schiller and Tom Quinn. So welcoming Tom into the critique seat. So thank you, Tom, for stepping up. And with that, we're going to take a short break and I'll be back.
Thanks.
All right. See ya.
All right.
Well.
Oh, who's typing?
It's George.
It's George. Yeah, I just muted him. Okay. Get the
Oh, shoot.
For the presenters, you have some really nice comments in the chat, so be sure to take a look at those.
Oh, thank you. I didn't even see that.
Oh my gosh, there's a whole string of them. Yeah. Outstanding, fantastic, amazing. Thank you, everybody. Great information and inspiration. Work was breathtaking, and your skill in describing what you did and how you did it brought such insight. So very nice.
Well, I think that we're always bringing in people from outside the club, out of the state even. And we have such a wealth of talent and skill in our club.
We do, no doubt about it.
And more than just the people that we had present tonight, because the people we had presenting tonight were just 5 of many. We just don't have time for all of them. So Douglas has said he's interested in doing this kind of panel at the November workshop. So
we should. That would be great.
With Kathy's suggestion. That's how I thought of it.
Credit, Douglas. She gave you credit.
Well, we're all inspired somewhere, Douglas, right?
Right.
Okay, well, we're going to continue on, just watching the clock. So I hope everybody had time to, take a small break, get something to eat or snack on. And so we're going to move. I'm going to announce the winners from April's Best of categories. And so I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can folks see that? Everybody good? All right, so first category was a science subject, which for the month of April was your own backyard. The winner entitled Immersion was Kathy Triolo. Woo, clap, clap, clap. Next category was abstract. This one was entitled Time for Reflection by Ingrid Lockhart. In the category of architecture, this is Dingle Bay Lighthouse by Bill Wages. The category of fauna, this is Busy Weaver Bird. Artist was Janice Rosner. In the category of flora, this is Sunset and Poppies. Artist is John Sievert. In natural landscape, with the title of 1920-307-099, The artist is Brian Dunbar. Must have been a tie. Also another natural landscape. This is Table Mountain Oak by Eric Ingalls. In night photography, this is Escalante by Michael Quinn. In the category of people, this is titled Cousins by Rachel Rosenthal. In photojournalism, this one's entitled Soul Play Festival 2017 California by Shelby Cohen. Travel, this is Mahane Yehuda Market in Jerusalem on Shabbat by Ellen Davis. In creative fantasy, anything goes. This is entitled Ghost of Edward Weston's Muse by Douglas Hooper. In manipulated but realistic, this is Sky Pond Sunrise, Same Day Sky Replacement by Michael Quinn. In black and white other, this one's entitled Back to Basics by Tom Quinn. And then color other, Magical Magenta Sunset by Bill Wages. And that brings us back to the beginning, and congratulations to all the category winners. Yes, well done, well done.
I think the Quinns are taking over.
I know the Quinns have been a common name on the winners for several months in a row. And so kudos to them. And we're going to have another Quinn here helping us with their critique. So with that, Kathy, I will turn it over to you.
Alrighty, thank you. Let's see.
Oh, let me stop sharing. That might help. Okay.
All right, so Tom and Chris, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Is that Chris?
Yes.
All right, great. And Tom?
I am here.
Excellent. Thank you both for volunteering tonight to be our critiques persons. I don't know what, should we call you critiquers? It's not really, not judges, but thank you. We really appreciate it. This is Tom's first time standing up on the critique stage, so we really appreciate him doing that.
Yes, be kind.
I think it's supposed to be the other way around. No, I think we'll be fine. So I am going to share my screen right here. And hopefully, does everyone see my screen now?
Yes.
Yes, did I hear a yes? All right. So the assigned subject is Portrait of a Hero. And this is She Who Serves.
Can that be enlarged, Kathy?
It should be enlarged on your screen. It's as large as it can get here.
Big white square next to the photo.
He's right, Kathy. There's something not right with the display.
Yeah.
Kathy, there's something called presenter view, and you are looking at, I don't know what they call it on your computer or your system, but we're looking at the notes on the right.
Oh, you're looking at the wrong one.
The presenter view, yes.
All right, let me see if I can do the right one. Thank you very much for pointing that out. Wait, that's not it. This is it. Okay, how's this one?
Better. Okay.
Is that the big screen?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, then you're out of the chutes. Go right ahead.
Okay, and it looks like Tom Quinn is right, got the first one.
Okay.
So the assigned category was Heroes, Portrait of a Hero. First off, a striking image, and a bunch of questions came to my head because the title didn't help me out. So some of the questions the photograph raises for me right off the bat are, Is this the same person? I'm wondering, is it a younger version of herself on the wall? If not, is there some, what's the relationship between these two individuals? And why is there that large photo on the wall? I mean, it's obviously a very impressive large enlargement on the wall, a person wrapped in flag. So I just goes, these questions were, I couldn't get past them and looking at the photograph, wanting to know more about the photograph and about the individuals involved, individuals involved. And I see Shelby is ready to chime in. So can she help us out?
Actually, no, we don't have time for that.
Okay, well, I'm just going to say that that I love the photograph, but it does leave me begging those sorts of questions. Not easy to take a photograph of a photograph. So I thought very well done in terms of capturing a great image on the wall and photographing it while still having a great image of the individual in the foreground. I love the pose and the juxtaposition of the individual in the foreground and with the background. I thought the exposure was great and even between the photograph and of the individual. I found the bag on the floor and the cup superfluous and perhaps slightly distracting. But then again, I thought about it and it adds sort of a sense of informality, of spontaneity, instead of it being a real formal portrait of the woman in front of the other portrait. A little bit of a curvature on the door frame on the side, minor issue, but to my eye, getting pulled to the right there with that white frame, straightening up that door frame would probably help as well. But love the color tones, rich reds, great royal blues, and the juxtaposition of the photograph and the person in front of it are wonderful. So nice image.
All right, photographer is Kathy Triolo. This is garden bull frog.
I don't know if this image was miscategorized, but I like the idea of living in a universe where one of my heroes is a benevolently gazing garden bullfrog. This is a challenging image because of the bright highlights and dark shadows, but it looks like the photographer has done a good job in post-processing trying to balance them, or maybe that's phone software that's doing the processing. I tried cropping about 20% off the right side, and I thought that improved the image. I might also darken some of the bright grass and bush areas to keep the focus on the frog. Thanks for sharing.
The maker is Fred Crowder. This is Peter Pilot, teacher friend.
The first thing that struck me about this photograph is the intense gaze of Peter. I first thought his name was Peter Pilot, but then I realized Peter is a pilot as well as a friend. Striking blue eyes that come through well in the photograph. An informal scene, you know, could come across as just a snapshot of a friend around the table, but due to that gaze and that pose comes across as more than that. Again, led me questioning, is this a personal hero to the individual who took the photograph, or is there something more there? I found the focus on the key aspects on the face and the subject's hands to be a little soft, a little off, perhaps a little clearer even on the stonework in the back than on the main subject. So kind of a busy setting with a number of objects and patterns going on in different directions, and something that could have brought in just on Peter and that gaze, I think would have been great.
All right. The maker is Jeff Alstetter. This is the mare who changed my world.
I like the light on the horse, and I like the horse's expression even more. The photographer has nicely captured a peaceful, loving look with sharp focus on the horse's head and pleasantly forward-pointing ears. At first, I wasn't sure about the unnatural-looking view through the doorway, but it grew on me. It gives the photograph a painterly feel and makes the shot more like a painted portrait. I tried cropping about 25% off the top, and I thought that improved the image a lot. I appreciate you sharing your hero with us.
The maker is Lucy Tatro. And that concludes the assigned subject. And now we're into abstract. The first image is Inside Flower Abstract.
Really cool image. I'm assuming a single exposure. I was kind of curious about that, whether it was or was not. Very warm colors. Kind of begs the question of what it means to be abstract. I mean, it's abstract in a sense, but then again, it's clearly what it's labeled as is clearly a close-up macro view of the inside of a flower. It felt a little bit clipped at the top to me. If we were going to include the full the stamen there, it felt like maybe going a little bit above would to include the rest of that would have been helpful. But then again, maybe would have lost a little bit at the bottom. Wondering if it was intentionally done to be very grainy or just a consequence of the type of shot. In any case, I found that the heavy graininess works for me in this shot. And I like it. I like the photograph. Thank you.
The, well, let me go back. The maker is Jerry Thomas. This is rock art.
So I saw this photo and I asked myself, what's the difference between dirt and rock? And the answer that came to me is time. One precedes the other, but it could go either way depending upon geologic fate. And that's what's great about abstract images. They make us think a little bit deeper. This photo has a very nice balance of textures between the wrinkles and the granularity. And I love the full spectrum of browns present in the image. I think the composition is effective, and it certainly made me pause and think a little more. What a nice gem of a photo.
The maker is Janice Rossner, and that ends abstract. And now we are doing architecture category. First photo is winery vent.
Well, obviously what immediately jumps out of you when you look at this photograph is that luminous yellow. Makes me ask, was the whole scene was the whole scene painted that color yellow? Because I see it on the venting, I see it on some of the boards. It makes me think the whole thing was at one time that color, which was pretty odd choice at that time. But coming out spotty the way it is now, it really makes it effective, contrasting with the aged gray look. Nice lighting, kind of from dark to light. You have a full range in there. Pleasing mix of horizontal and vertical lines. There's a little web in the top of the vented window, which I think adds a nice element to the photograph as well. I really like these sorts of old wood photos. I've taken quite a few myself. For me, the best of these real old wood ones show the texture real well. And maybe it's just me, a personal choice, but I like a really crisp, clear focus on the wood to pick up the grain. And this one, it felt like it was a little soft in the focus on the wood grain. I felt like if it was a little crisper, it would have made it pop that much more. As it is, though, very nice and good composition. So thank you.
The maker is Fred Crowder. This is one window at Empire Mine.
As humans, we love to segment and categorize. We like to put things into little boxes. This image of a window takes that concept and both shatters it and embraces it. In each pane, we get a different little world to explore. Here there are ice flows, there is a portrait, and there are maybe bones or a train smokestack or dreamlike geometries or unreadable paragraphs explaining machinery. The complementary blue and orange color palette is very effective, and how the colors are contained within the mullions is masterful. This image is original and very well executed. Hurrah!
Hurrah indeed. The maker is Ingrid Lockhart. This is Stairway to the Past.
Another great photo. Some might find that the many different angles and lines resulted in an overly busy photo. Not for me. I think it takes what might otherwise be considered a very simple subject matter to a much more striking and interesting photo. The yellow on the steps makes the stairs really pop provides a nice contrast with the red brick in the background. It's a nice composition with effective handling of probably challenging mixed lighting conditions. Very well done.
The photographer is Patricia Levitin. This is Fort Point.
This image has an impressive composition. The central tower anchors the image, and the building and bridge form an almost M.C. Escher-like wrapping of geometric forms around it. We get a sense of depth, and there are endless shapes for our eyes to explore. I like how the people in the image are not obvious at first glance, but they add a sense of scale and even a little mystery, like, why are they there? The faded colors of the image give a feeling of age, even without the rust streaks and old school architecture. This image is hitting on all cylinders. Thanks for sharing.
And the maker is Patricia Levitin. This is Galleries Lafayette.
Thank you.
This is Galleries Lafayette Baroque Napoleon III style dome in Paris.
First of all, what a beautiful place. I actually Googled that. I'm glad it was such a detailed title, and I was looking at additional photos. It's a really cool place. I'm a fan of glass and stained glass and images of that, and this one really captures it. It can be real tough to get the proper exposure throughout an image like this, from the dark shadowed areas up in the top and on the right down to that lower left, without completely blowing out the lower left. The photographer did an excellent job, I thought, of capturing that full range. When I looked at this online, you're able to zoom now on our site. I found myself zooming in and around, meandering around this photograph. And I really believe there are many beautiful photographs within this photograph. It's that kind of image. Nice clear focus throughout the entire image, including in the darker areas. A really beautiful architectural photo.
And the photographer is George Pelpel. This is Late Spring Snow in Loyalton.
This photo has a great feeling of light. I love the golden, almost glowing barn face and the details of the fencing along the side of the barn. The sweeping tire tracks encircling the barn really add to the image, and the corrugated snow on the roof make for great highlights. I also like the misty, distant mountains in the background. While I think the composition is workable, I'm bothered by the greenish cast in the clouds in the upper part of the image. This could be improved through local desaturation, but I'm also not sure that the upper clouds add much to the image. I tried cropping out most of the sky and a little of the bottom too, and I thought that improved the image. I'd encourage the photographer to explore other compositions and croppings. This is a beautiful scene that was well captured.
And the maker is Eric Ingalls. And that ends architecture. And now we are in the fauna category. Flight of Fancy.
I found this to be a perfect example of how perfect focus is not always necessary or even preferable in bird in flight photos. The wing blur in the brighter light contains enough feather pattern and detail while demonstrating the motion of the bird. Captures that perfectly for me. The red on this finch is beautiful and nicely contrasted with the black at the lower part and with the white in the upper part. The photographer worked in post-processing, it seems to me, to bring in detail on the shaded areas of the bird, so that consequently, I found if you zoom in on the shaded parts of the bird, it is quite grainy, and that's just a consequence of the incredibly mixed lighting the photographer was dealing with. It doesn't really detract from the image. It's a very nice picture of a common bird, showing how uncommon a photograph can be.
And the maker is Kathy Triolo. This is Nemo's Friends, Papua New Guinea.
The crispness, definition, and motion of the fronds or tentacles in this image is amazing, and the arrangement of the fish against them makes for a nice subject contrast. The bright colors and patterns of the fish keep our eyes moving around and exploring their features. There are a few things I think that could make the image better. There's chromatic aberration that is most obvious at the edges of the white areas on the fish that are easily corrected in Photoshop. There's also Not much going on in the upper right of the image, and I found that cropping the top and right made for a more compelling composition. I also slid the temperature slider slightly to the right in Lightroom, and I thought the extra warmth improved the image without losing an underwater feel. These are minor improvements to an already striking image.
And the photographer is Mark Davis. This is Two Reactions to Mornings, Elephant Seals.
I not only love the title, but I love this photograph. First time I saw it, it made me smile. I always enjoy an element of humor in photographs in general, and particularly photographs of animals, and this one has it. Really nice crop, whether it was done in camera or in post-processing, not particularly important, but I like the way it was cropped. I like the fact that the photographer focused so heavily on those two wonderful faces. Interestingly, for a photograph of this type, I found the color palette to be very pleasing. It's there's quite a bit of variation in there, a pleasing soft color palette. And I found the lines formed between the bodies of these elephant seals radiating out from the bottom in different directions added another interesting element to what is already an overall really great elephant seal photograph.
And the maker was Ann Westling. This is White on White Great Egret.
The white egret framed with the upright branch is a wonderful juxtaposition. The almost monochrome feel of this image is accentuated by the orange bill of the bird, which brings our eyes to the sinuous neck and the sharp point of the eye. The single extended leg adds another element of interest to the photo, and the vertical crescendo of bright white to deep shadows makes for a well-anchored image. I'd encourage the photographer to crop 25% off the right side of the image and maybe a little off the top too, which eliminates the distracting knot on the branch and places the egret in a more compositionally favorable place in the frame. I found this to be a much more powerful composition, but your mileage may vary. This is a great shot of a great egret, haha.
And the maker is Ann Westling. This is titled Sassy Robin.
And it certainly is. You know, we see so many robins around that you sort of take them for granted, but this shot really brings out just how beautiful that orange breast is on our common robins. It's well captured here with nice detail and nice color, particularly on the upper part of the chest. This guy does seem to be displaying a sassy attitude, so a great title. Made me wonder if there was a nest nearby that was staking out its position. I would have liked a bit more focus detail on the head. I noticed particularly when I zoomed in, the pretty soft focus from the beak and the eyes on up. Pretty tough to do, I realize, with such a shallow depth of field that you're dealing with in this image. I thought perhaps a bit of vignetting might have helped as well, just to bring the main subject into focus. I like the framing formed by the dead branch above and below the bird, but that white branch right in front of its orange chest is a bit of a distraction. Overall, a very nice picture of one of our more common feathered friends.
And the maker is Daniel Chaplin. That ends fauna. And now we are heading into flora. And this is Trees Along Highway 128.
The high contrast, almost pointillistic feel of this image is very appealing to me, and I'm already a lover of tree images. The whites and blacks of the trees are a beautiful screen for the golden, orange, and greens of the background. There's an astonishing feeling of light and depth in this image that I could drown in. I cropped about 15% off the right side and rotated the image clockwise a little, and I wish I could show you how this takes the image to the next level. It snaps into a fantastic scene with those trees leaning outward and a path to the wonderful light in the middle. In my opinion, it takes a good image and makes it truly marvelous. Thanks for sharing.
The maker is Mike Shea. This is the Book of Brodia.
First of all, a very clever idea and visually striking. Good use of the black background to really highlight the stems and the flowers. I particularly found the stems nice. If you look closely at those stems, they're luminous and they're wonderful shades against that black background. Unlike dealing with a as found in nature, the photographer here was able to place those flowers and stems in the desired position as if arranging in a vase, and did a very nice job of it. I think it might have been fun to be able to see the title of the book that's just barely visible off to the side, particularly if the title of the book was something related to botany or plants. And it may be, in fact, that actually looks like part of the McGraw-Hill science series, of which I have several of myself. So anyway, a very nice photograph and a little different take on the flora genre.
And the photographer is Chris Schiller. This is small flowered fritillary.
It's nice how this image pairs with my previous image and how this photographer needs no book to make a quality composition. Everything is working in this image. The upward pointing leaves give a terrific juxtaposition to the downward pointing blooms. The curves of the leaves lend a fine balance right and left and reaching skyward in the frame. The soft yellows are singing a harmony with the subdued greens. There's a perfection here that is difficult to bring together, and the photographer definitely succeeded.
And the maker is Eric Engels. This is Coleus.
Another very, very cool image. Great colors, nicely blended, coming together. The direct vertical approach, shooting straight down, that the photographer took really works well here. Having a nice even depth of field throughout the photograph. Nice subtle vignetting and a great exposure throughout the image. Beautiful contrast and detail without overdoing it, without making it an overcooked image, what some could easily fall into. I can see this being enlarged and making a striking piece of wall art. Beautiful image.
And the maker is Michael Quinn. This is Iris Implosion.
This image is like the first taste of cinnamon candy in the mouth, or a Maui sunset wearing a Hawaiian shirt with a Mai Tai in hand. It's everything our eyes crave and all the Kodachrome colors one might wish for in dreams. It's a bee's eye view of paradise and a gardener's idea of success. It's brilliant and beautiful, very nice.
And the maker is Lucy Tetro. This is Looking Up.
I've spent my share of time crouched or lying flat on my back shooting upwards at plants, so I can appreciate the photographer's perspective here. The pink contrasted against that blue sky makes for a pretty color display. To me, to my eye, the shot feels a bit oversaturated, both in the blue, the green, but also in the pink foreground. But that's personal based on my tastes. I found it perhaps a little bit heavy contrast a little on the other sliders as well, resulting in an enlargement if you'll see some aberrations around the edges of some of the petals and some of the leaves. Overall, a nice composition that for me would benefit from a slightly lighter touch on the sliders in post-processing.
And the maker is Gary Kartstaffner. This is Cactus Flower in 2021 Isolation.
I like how the stamens of the flower are peeking from the petals, almost like fingers reaching for the sky. The yellows of the central bloom leaves fade nicely into the whites of the full petals, leaving me wondering where leaves end and petals begin. Given the title, I'm going to go with this image as a metaphor. A central gathering of beauty eclipsed by an entity prickly and unavoidable. One suggestion is to improve the image is to crop about 20% off the right side. Thanks for sharing.
And the maker is Fred Claessens. That ends Flora. And now we are in Natural Landscape. The first one is Good Morning Sunshine.
Another one of those wow images. It's the classic Monument Valley view. Wonderful clouds, very dramatic, which is what the photographer was going for. A bit of an unusual treatment, opting for the looking directly at the sun, therefore resulting in a very dark image elsewhere, including the sky. In some ways, kudos to the photographer for taking an overshot scene that has been overly exposed on Instagram and elsewhere and making it into something different, make it into something of their own. Even with that, I'm sure this photographer has probably dozens of images taken this very morning, chose to use this one with the direct sun rather than come peeking out behind the rock formations there. I'd be curious to know what some of those earlier images look like myself. As much as the sky is a major player in this image, it seems a bit tight at the bottom. I think I may be including a little bit more in the foreground and perhaps a little bit less of the sky might help benefit this photograph, but undeniably a wonderful and dramatic image.
And the photographer is Janice Rossner. This is Sunrise, Mesquite Flats, Death Valley.
My first and prejudiced thought was to try this photo in black and white, but I found that was misguided. And I also found that it helped me see how well the colors worked in this image. There's a coldness in the foreground, a warmth in the middle, a mix of blue and brown farther back, and then a fading to blue distance in the background. The composition of this photo is exceptional, with its overlapping back and forth angled lines and the contrasting elements of the sand peaks. The variety of ripples and textures included also makes for an interesting photograph. This is a superb image, and I'd love to see it enlarged and hung on a wall, as if I could step into it.
And the photographer is Fred Finney. This is Beach Bones.
Very pretty scene. There's lots going on in here. Lovely little details like the pink flowers on the right side of the driftwood there, the dried yellow grasses in the foreground. There's a small window in the center through the root mass. Great setting with that sunset light. Good exposure, which is very challenging looking at this photograph to get good even exposure throughout, and very nice depth of field throughout. Interesting choice to include a person walking on the left side with a bright red hat, maybe a personal bias, but I probably would have removed that person, but that's totally personal taste. Some folks maybe find that adds to the scene. A nice seascape sunset scene.
And the photographer is Dave McLellan. This is Yuba River Lupin Poppy Sunset.
There's nothing better than that local pairing of lupine and poppy, like yin and yang on the canyon sides. This is a classic composition, well executed, and it's similar enough to an image that I reviewed last year to make me wonder if the photographer would return to the same spot for a redo. Either way, this is definitely the superior composition. The photographer used a long exposure to blend the whites of the water and deepen the green of the river. Even the sunset clouds cooperated. Well done.
And the maker is Henry Goodman. This is Little Wild Horse Canyon, Utah.
I love photos from the canyon country. There's so many photographic opportunities, and the photographer chose here to what otherwise would be considered a simple scene from within a grand landscape, and did it very effectively. Pretty rock colors captured here with nice contrast with the green leaves on the cottonwood. The very bright white along the bottom feels a bit blown out to me. If it was possible to, in post-processing, tone that down, bring the highlights down a bit, I think that would help. The eye gets drawn heavily down to that bright white at the bottom. That said, this is a very tough light and shadow image with the mixed exposures, and in general, the photographer did a good job managing that. It's a pleasant, small, simple composition of a Southwest scene.
And the photographer is Daniel Chaplin. This is Pfeiffer Beach, Big Sur.
It would have been easy to frame this image with just the sunlight through the sea holes, but the photographer dug deeper into their composition toolbox to go beyond the snapshot, and I, for one, am glad they did. The foreground water really makes this image, and it adds depth and movement and additional layers of complexity. The blueness of the foreground of the image makes the warm sunset light all the more glorious. I tried cropping a little off the right side, and I thought it improved the image a little, but that's a minor suggestion for a very pleasing image.
And the maker is Rachel Rosenthal. That ends natural landscape, and now we are in the category of night photography. This is Downeyville Dreams.
For starters, I'll say this is clearly the best photograph of Downeyville that I've ever seen. I think their Chamber of Commerce would love it. So if I think I would contact them. We see lots of images of Milky Ways nowadays, and finding new and interesting foregrounds is really the challenge to turn a Milky Way shot into a really nice, compelling photograph. The photographer certainly did that here. Not only chose a great spot to photograph the Milky Way with a great foreground, but really pulled it off. Great exposure, nice colors, perfect river reflections, a really wonderful night photo.
And the photographer is Mike Oitzman. This is Mobius and Milky Way Arch.
Oh yeah, this is what Milky Way photography is all about. A nicely exposed galactic disk and stars contrasted with earthly formations. Note the sharp foreground and background, even though they are separated by thousands of light years. And speaking of light, the foreground formations are very nicely light painted. Somewhere out there, beings might someday wonder at the play of light through rounded rocks at a great distance. I'd be tempted to crop a little off the right and off the top, since there's less going on in the upper right, but that's a secondary suggestion. Very nicely done.
And the photographer is John Sievert. This is the Pleiades, Dalton Highway, Alaska.
How can you not love photographs of the Aurora Borealis? In this one, the photographer captured the classic color and pattern wonderfully. Like Milky Way photos that I mentioned before, the challenge to me to take a excellent Aurora Borealis photograph and have it transcend into something really outstanding is to have an interesting foreground. I found the trees in this to be iconic of that part of Alaska, but to me, they just don't add all that much to the photograph. And yet, they still seem to be blocking the intense green part of the very bottom of the Borealis. Perhaps if the photographer had moved slightly to the left, we would peek in behind that last group of trees to see that bottom part. Still, I'm being picky. I would love to have taken this photograph, and it's a fabulous capture of a very cool phenomenon.
And the photographer is Fred Finney. This is dawn at Mono Lake, Lee Vining, California.
That pairing of royal blue with glowing gold seems to be a theme for the night, and this photo is another wonderful combination of the two. The ghostly tufa formations give this image an otherworldly feel that is pleasing. It's hard to say if the formations are light painted or just pulled up from the shadows in post-processing, but if they are light painted, it was well executed. There's good focus front to back on this photo, and I can almost feel myself there and smell the salty richness of the lake. The tufa formations on the left seem distorted due to the use of a wide-angle lens, and I'd be tempted to use a skew transform to make them look a little more vertical by pulling the lower left corner out, but maybe they're part of the otherworldly feel of the photo. Thanks for taking us there.
And the maker is George Pelpel. And we are now in the people category with Emily, Santa Clara graduation.
It's a very nice portrait of a very pretty young woman. I thought the light was handled very well, very even tones throughout. Upon examining it close up and zooming in on it, that's especially noticeable. Also, what's very noticeable is the beautiful smile and the beautiful eyes on this young woman. It made me, in fact, wonder if a little tighter crop would be preferable, taking a bit off the top. The fact that it was a Santa Clara graduation, I haven't been to the University of Santa Clara, perhaps that building is representative of such, and therefore it ties in with the graduation. But just as a portrait, I don't think it adds much, and I think a tighter crop from the top would add it and make an already very nice portrait even better.
The photographer is Shelby Cohen. And this is titled No Face Mask While Cooling Off in the Yuba River.
Woohoo, let's get naked. No mask? Well, let's shed any other cloth too. This is a playful picture that is the perfect antidote for COVID restrictions and isolation. Let's all go to the river tomorrow and do the same. Woohoo!
And the photographer is Fred Clausens. This is Joy in Seattle.
Wow, on that color on that wall, it's incredible. And the subject, this is the people category. The subject's yellow gold jacket works wonderfully against that blue at the bottom with the tree reflection. A fun, happy subject with a fun pose. The photographer has captured a great smile on this woman. Joy is indeed in her pose. It made me wonder if that is also her name, Joy in Seattle. If so, that's even more clever, but otherwise still great. And I really enjoyed viewing this photograph.
And the photographer is Mark Davis. It is a big world out there.
This is a well-executed black and white photograph. The composition is fabulous, and it seems like the photographer was acting on pure instinct to capture this scene, since I suspect the child would not be holding that position for long. The photograph also tells a story in one frame and elicits an emotional reaction within us when we see it. The photographer has expertly used burning and dodging and vignetting to isolate and focus our attention on the child. Bravo.
And the photographer is Tom Quinn. This is Proud Dad, Havana.
Great candid moment photograph. Really like candid shots in people pictures. Wonderful expressions caught by the photographer. Good clarity. I love those red drums in contrast to the overall yellow. The yellowish overall tone was a bit, put me off a little bit. It felt overly dominant, but given the fact that the walls, the drums, and maybe the ambient light in the area just made that unavoidable. I found it especially distracting on the young girl's face and arms. It just came across as too yellowish to me. But thanks for sharing this fun image from another part of our world. This one easily could have been in the travel category as well. Just as an aside, the decals, by the way, on that drum from Havana are from Steve's of Montreal, Ottawa, and Toronto, which I thought was great too, in terms of a little snapshot of our planet.
And the maker was Ed Sylvester. This is Vanessa in Lace.
The photographer did a great job capturing this image in challenging conditions. The composition is excellent and the model is well posed. The photographer has used vignetting to keep our eyes focused on the central elements of the woman, the dress, and the parasol. There are several things that I might suggest to improve the image. The face is shadowed and it looks like the focus point is on the woman's hand or shoulder instead of her face. Selective sharpening of the face might help with this. Fill flash or a reflector would help balance the bright sunlit areas with the shadowed face. Finally, it might be better to have more separation of the model from the background wall so that the texture of the siding is not as sharp if the right depth of field was chosen. Thanks for sharing this image with us.
And the photographer is Lori Woodhull. And that ends people. And now photojournalism. The first one is Timber Boss.
In our photojournalism category, we've seen a few tree workers in the past couple of years, probably because they're everywhere in our county. This is the first one I remember that actually caught a significant sized piece of wood in flight. So nice capture there. Great framing of the climber between the two trees. The red shirt against the blue sky is a nice additional added element. I wondered if it'd be possible to bring up the shadows on the face to better see his expression at the exact moment when that piece of wood was released. On close-up, you can actually see small wood chips flying as that piece broke off. A well-timed capture.
And the photographer is Lori Woodhull. This is Barcelona firefighters strike.
This is a phenomenal example of photojournalism. It captures the story of the scene, but also contains several levels of complexity in one image. We know it's a foreign scene because of the unfamiliar helmet and the non-English banners. There are also the state buildings and massed uniforms that form the basic story. But there's also the prominent figure of the firefighter photographing the same scene. The smartphone lets us know this is a modern image, and it also makes the helmeted uniform and almost faceless firefighter more human. Finally, there is that little treat of a sticker on his helmet saying bombers, and that leaves us with a question. Very nicely done.
And the photographer is Michael Quinn. This is, I don't see any animals out there, do you?
and which is a great title. And humor in photojournalism is tough, but the photographer sure pulled it off here. First off, those cheetahs are beautiful. So even though it's photojournalism, we still have this wonderful wildlife element in there. The big question I have is, are those folks in that truck really unaware of those cats? And it certainly looks so. It doesn't look like it's posed to pretend they are, which is just amazing. I assume a high, strong telephoto lens has resulted in the compressed depth of field, and the telephoto lens really makes it look as if those cats are walking right underneath the truck. I have to assume they're not quite that close. A really wonderful photograph.
And the maker is Bernadette Sylvester, and that ends photojournalism. Now we're into travel. This is Les Beaux.
Even without the title, we can guess that this is a town in Europe and that it is an old town. The stone houses and the stone rock formations all fuse together. There is a wonderful smoky afternoon light that gives a softness to it all and makes for a natural, pleasant image. I tried a little vignetting and I thought it improved the image a little, bringing us more focus to the central cluster of houses. Thank you for taking us on your travels.
And the photographer is Tom Quinn. This is Along the Waterfront, Shanghai.
Another one of those wow photographs that are becoming so common with this club. This one certainly captures the new China. I was so enthralled by this that I have to tell you, I quickly Googled Shanghai waterfront and found an article from the Atlantic, and it had an exact image taken from this spot in 1987 and again 25 years later. And it's worth Googling. It's mind-boggling how much this area has changed. But back to this photograph, wonderful color, wonderful light, the floodlights, the reflections on the water, the boats. This photo has it all. As someone that submitted another photo in this travel category, I would have highly recommended that this would be submitted in a different category because I don't want to compete against it. It's a really wonderful, impressive cityscape photograph and shows another part of the planet we don't see.
And the photographer is Rachel Rosenthal. This is Marina Bay Sands Hotel, Singapore.
Something about the lasers brings to mind nightlife and a thumping beat emanating from the focus of those beams. But maybe this is just a typical night scene in Singapore at that hotel. This photo has a great composition and is well exposed and framed. It captures a feeling of vibrance and wealth. At first, I thought the yellow-pink clouds in the upper left were an unnatural imposition. But then what's so natural about lasers? So I changed my mind and decided they fit in fine with the overall energy of the image. I would be tempted to remove the buoy in the lower left of the image as it draws my eyes away from the central elements. This is a great view of a foreign night. Thanks.
And the photographer is Ed Sylvester. And now, creative, fantasy, anything goes. Midnight Rendezvous.
Well, first off, I have to say that this is the category I'm least comfortable doing any critiquing on because it's just not something that I personally am familiar with. And that line between photography and graphic art is a tough one for me and certainly tough for me to critique. That said, this is a beautiful and striking image and undeniably creative, as the category would specify. I find myself wandering around the image and looking at the different components and wondering where the artist had pulled the different components from, photographs, graphic arts, but they all come together in an overall pleasing image and a compelling image. So thank you.
And the photographer or artist in this case is Dave McLellan. This is Fire Island Dreamscape.
I'm so glad that there is at least one Camera Club member who uses low fidelity photographic processes and experimental techniques. Images like this are the reason. Images like this resonate with a grainy cultural memory of a more primitive photographic past and perhaps a darker era of war and depression from the last century. This photograph invokes raised crops and smoky destruction, somewhere we don't want to live, but somehow feel compelled to explore through imagery. This image is perhaps about bruised emotions and the fire and dreamscape of its title. There is darkness, yes, but it's also a beautiful darkness.
And the artist is Ellen Davis. And that ends creative fantasy and now manipulated but realistic. This is Delphi Charioteer Hockney style.
Another photograph that I really like. It does beg the question for me of the definition of this category, which is a new one for us this year. It is manipulated, it is realistic. The overall composition is one more of a, not mosaic, what's the word I want? Well,
Collage.
Collage, yes, thank you. So in that sense, it doesn't come together as a single realistic image, but nonetheless has components of realism throughout. It's overall fun, creative, crisp, textured focus, surprising color scattered throughout. Overall, a very cool image.
And the maker is Jeff Alstatter. This is On the Way to Point Reyes.
There is a nice painterly feel to this classic California coastal image. Brown hillsides above a farmstead with sheltering cypress trees make this a nice postcard photograph. The fence line adds perspective and depth to the image. The fog clouds in the upper corners have a nice orange glow, but unfortunately the brightness and the golden color strongly pull my eyes away from all the other elements of the image. In my opinion, the golden patches should be desaturated and also darkened so that they are supporting players rather than bright interlopers in the photo. Otherwise, it's a nice little scene.
And the maker is Jonathan Beth. This is One Flower.
It certainly is. Very creative. Could have probably been in black and white. I think this is infrared, I'm not sure. Very nice treatment, creative. I love the way those little side leaves look like little arms and hands sort of raised out of the vase there. Very cute. I assume this could have been considered black and white. Perhaps there's more manipulation going on that I'm not aware of. It's creative, it's different, it's well executed. Thank you.
And the creator is Ingrid Lockhart. This is black and white, and the first one is Blue Lagoon, Iceland.
This is an excellent fine art black and white photograph. It's well composed and well executed. The photographer has used contrast, burning and dodging, and vignetting to improve the image. Notice how your eye circles around and around on the steam plumes, the people, and the features of the decking, never being led out of the frame. It's almost abstract, but also figuratively and literally peopled with elements that hold our interest. This photo is an inspiration to me of what I might explore in my own photography. Thank you.
And the photographer is Jerry Thomas. This is Circle of Women, 1985, Swan Gallery.
I was curious what the Swan Gallery reference was with regard to this, but obviously a very artistic, it's a clever artistic pose of some strong looking women. Well done, well exposed, good clarity, excellent angle the photographer chose for capturing the image. And if you look around the image, you'll see there's a really nice range of tones within the black and white, really solid black and white image.
And the photographer is Shelby Cohn. This is Friday Afternoon.
Welcome to the house that Weston and Cunningham and Man Ray architected. There are many fine rooms and in them many brilliant photographs of nudes. Here is a recent addition and a remarkable extension it is indeed. The grain and rich tone of skin echoes the grain and rich tone of leather, and the folds and shadows of body and couch blend and shine into a greater whole. The composition is stunning, and the use of shadow and light are exquisite in revealing and hiding form and mystery. This image deserves its place in the House of Masters. Absolutely magnificent.
And the photographer is Douglas Hooper. This is Skyrock and the High Sierra.
Another wow photo. Great depth of field to capture this. I was curious if this was some focus stacking going on. I assume it's one image. Really, really well done. I like taking petroglyph and pictograph photographs, and I really like to try to capture them in the context of the landscape in which they're found. And that's very difficult to do. The photographer here did an outstanding job of that. great contrast to have those petroglyphs really pop against the dark rock. A little bit of grainy quality in some areas, especially in the middle ground between the petroglyphs and the mountain in the background. That really is not too much of a distraction because that's not the key elements of the photograph. The foreground and that wonderful background are what it's all about. Really well done.
The photographer is Chris Schiller. This,
Who let that guy in the club anyway?
this is Plastic Obscura.
Yes, and yes, we have execution and experimentation working together. The photographer had a vision and followed through with it most superbly. Are we looking through the lens of memory or the window of dreams? The clarity of the toes is probably serendipity, but it's a very satisfying element to discover as my eyes circulate around within the photograph. The photo has a nice range of tones from blacks to whites and possesses a pleasing originality. Fantastic.
And the maker is Douglas Hooper. Ending that category, we are now into color, and the first one is ornaments.
Fantastic first impression when you look at this picture. It just grabs you. I've played around using intentional camera movement on Christmas trees, and you can really get some fun images, and the photographer did a great job with this one. It borders on abstract, but there's just enough detail in the balls and shapes, including 2 stars, one in the upper left and one in the lower left, just to add some additional elements of interest. Wonderful colors. I especially love that yellow ball in the upper left. Feels a lot like pouring rain in front of the lens in this picture, just adding an additional attractive element. I really like this.
And the artist is Mike Shea. This is Slumber Time, My Little Poppy.
I gasped out loud when I saw this image, especially with the punch of color after the black and white category. The composition is awesome and the choice of depth of field is terrific. The form of the main poppy is positively transcendent. At first I thought that strange in-focus leaf in the lower right was a fault of the photo and that I might use Gaussian blur to help fade it into the background, but I quickly changed my mind. Without it, the unfolded poppy might be a little too perfect and too sterile. I think it needs a foil, even if it breaks a few rules. Glorious.
And the photographer is John Sievert. This is the Tulips of Washington.
Who needs to go to the Netherlands, right? To see tulips. Lovely color here, caught at apparently close to their peak or at their peak of the tulip season. Great leading lines, leading the eye from the bottom of the photograph to the upper right. At first, I thought I would like to see the shadows brightened down in the bases of the tulips, but the more I looked at it, I think the contrast between the dark at the bottom just makes the pinks pop that much more at the top. In my opinion, you might consider cropping a bit from the top. The sky doesn't add all that much in the upper end, and it would just bring the eye more down into the main focus point of the tulips. A successful capture of an incredible tulip crop.
And the photographer is Bernadette Sylvester. This is Out for a Walk.
As a fan of abstract images, this photo sucks me right in. The slanting precipitation makes for a great dynamic cross current through the strong horizontal lines in the upper part of the image. My mind both strives to make sense and lets itself get lost at the same time. The title of the photo gives us a clue for something to hook onto, but I personally like the image with its almost hidden secrets. Very nice.
The photographer is Ellen Davis. This is Orange Tree Web.
Really well done color image. It's tough to capture spider webs, the intricacy of spider webs, especially tough to do it while also having an interesting and attractive scene behind the web. Sometimes you'll see a cool web, but it's just the web. Sometimes you'll see a nice scene and the web is not in focus. Here you've got both, and it was really well executed. Crisp focus on the web, yielding to a somewhat softer but pleasing luminance on the oranges behind. Would comment that there's perhaps a bit blown out on the sunlight on the sides of the oranges. bit of a distraction, but looking at it closely, it appears the photographer tried to tone them down in post-processing. And of course, to get adequate exposure on that web on the initial photograph, you had to have effectively capture the web. It would have been tough to also not get that brightness on the oranges. Extremely well done and a very pleasing photograph.
And the photographer is Gary Kartstaffner. And this is Bike on a Wall.
Hello, what a pleasing way to end the evening. I think about what this photo might be without the screening grasses, and I think it would be a lesser image. It's almost as if we were peering through a knot in a fence of a neighbor's yard, looking in on a concealed project. Here are the theme colors of the evening again, this time a sky blue against the glowing yellow-orange of the fence. I love the ambiguous handlebar seat looking like a rusted skull and horns hung like a trophy. I added a little vignetting and I thought that it improved an already handsome photo. Thank you for sharing. And thanks to Tom for being my partner in reviewing tonight. Great job.
Thank you, Chris.
And the maker is, what's my sheet? Jonathan Beth. So thank you. And that ends this evening's critique. And I want to thank both Chris and Tom for doing an excellent job tonight. Thank you very much for your insights. And as they said, it is their opinion, but they have great opinions, I think. So as Chris says, your mileage may vary. So take what you want, leave what you don't. All right, Rachel, back to you.
Okay. Well, thanks, Chris and Tom. And Tom, welcome to the ranks of critiquers. So nice job, both of you. Also,
it did make me appreciate the critiquers who do that regularly. It's surprisingly time consuming to go through that.
It is.
So thank you to our volunteer critiquers. We appreciate it.
Multitasking while watching Phil Mickelson win the PGA turned out to be
behind the scenes look, right?
And thanks too to our presenters. Again, that's not trivial to put together a very tightly timed presentation. You all did a great job. And Rick, Frank, Dave, George, and Mike. So thank you to you guys. Next meeting is June 28th. So mark your calendars. The video from tonight's meeting will be uploaded, let's say by Thursday. You can look on the club's website. And don't forget to vote for tonight's images by category. Votes are due on Friday at midnight before our next meeting, but you could vote tomorrow, I think, if you wanted to. So
vote tonight.
Do that, because each month we always, want to have as much participation as possible. So please vote. So with that, that ends our meeting tonight. And I hope you all have a great evening. And I'm going to stop recording.
Oh, thank you.